Hello, everyone, and welcome to the public space. Today, a special report on the structure of Jewish influence in America. The subject that we're about to cover is so vast that we both agree, me and Frame Games, that it will be impossible to cover today in full. So what we're going to do is to give you a teaser, a kind of outlook on the ensemble of the picture, and we're going to do a regular series where Frame Game will come back, or potentially other contributors, where we will talk to you about what does this result in your life, what kind of outlets do these organizations sponsor, what kind of effect do they have on the democratic system. What we're uncovering right now is today is a big picture of the ensemble of Jewish influences that are known to interfere or to act in American policy, American media in some way, but we'll cover that more in a future episode, just so you have an idea of the size of the system that we're talking about. And to talk about this, Frame Game has come. How are you doing today, Frame Game?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me, JF.
And as a reminder for the structure of these episodes, I am the editor of these episodes. I make the choices. Behind the curtain is a choice of word that I did, and I chose to illustrate George Soros because although what we're about to talk about implies thousands of people, thousands of professionals, of lawyers, of policymakers, of politicians, the system that we're talking about is very well represented by George Soros, who is a billionaire who tends to fund political activities that are in line with his interest. And so I think that he is a figure that deserves to be illustrated because people know him. But what we're about to talk to you is much greater than George Soros himself. And Behind the Curtain was chosen as a title because what we're about to illustrate are things that are not very covered in mainstream media. So we're about to reveal the structure of a set of influencers on American politics that are normally not covered by mainstream media. Frame Games,
That's
would you
right.
like to do an opening statement?
I would. Thanks a lot, Jeff. So I just want, because this is such a sensitive topic, I want to make sure the audience and the media who watch this show knows that I'm coming to this topic from a place of love. I'm a Jewish attorney. I spent 10 years in Hebrew school. I was bar mitzvahed. I spent another 2 years in Hebrew school and was confirmed. I grew up in a Jewish family, in a Jewish neighborhood, with Jewish friends that I still have. And I spent every Friday of my upbringing with my Jewish Shabbat club. I am proud of my Jewish heritage. I'm proud of Jewish contributions to Western society, of the success and contributions of Jewish doctors, dentists, and accountants. I'm proud of Jewish achievements in science, in cyber technology, in music, literature, culture, and breakthrough discoveries like quantum physics. I'm talking about my people's political organizations tonight because there is sufficient evidence of excess and corruption to warrant an audit of the structure of Jewish affinity groups. There are many great Black men and women who call out the excesses of the Al Sharptons, the Jesse Jacksons, the Louis Farrakhans, and the myriad Black identity politics excesses of the diversity industry. I consider myself a Jewish parallel of those great Black intellectuals, who include Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, Candace Owens, and most recently, Kanye West. I am not the first Jewish man to say the things that I'm going to say tonight. A short list includes Norman Finkelstein, Benjamin Friedman, and many others. While loving my people, I believe in tough love. There is not a self-hating bone in my body. I want what's best for my people, and what's best is a rigorous and public audit of our leadership. I volunteered to present tonight's topic, the structure of Jewish political influence in America, because organized Jewry is not changing. It's not going to change until pressure forces it to do so, and I hope that public opinion can be mobilized around an honest audit in a way that has that love, but also tough love, which is to say that I say what I say about organized Jewish political structures with hope and with love, but also with complete and resolute firmness, that you can only make change the same way you make diamonds, pressure. And it is well past time that Jewish political groups experience this transformative force.
All right, and as a reminder to our viewers in Canada, we are talking about this subject not to point to an entire population of human beings, but we are interested particularly in how people who are member of the Jewish population interfere in American politics and participate to American politics, as well as funding of various institutions. Everything that you're about to hear is discussed as part of policy determination and understanding of potential acts of fraud that can be committed by individual, and as such benefits from all protection under Canadian law for policy determined discussions. And an important point to make is that when we are looking at the contribution of some Jewish individuals to politics, we don't mean that all Jews are participating to this, right?
That's absolutely right. So that actually segues very nicely into what I was going to sort of make the first part of the presentation, which is just about some numbers. Again, we're talking about community institutions, not about Jewish people themselves. So according to Pew Research Center in their October 1st, 2013 Portrait of Jewish Americans, 82% of American Jews do not belong to Jewish organizations. And of that 18% of American Jews who do, vastly, vastly fewer of them are a part of the political leadership that comprises the leaders of the organizations we'll be discussing tonight. So it is very important to remember that this is not all Jewish people, not all Jewish organizations. Some further research is that 70% of American Jews are only somewhat or not at all attached to Israel. 57% of American Jews have never traveled to Israel, and 44% think that Israeli settlement building in the West Bank is a bad idea. That's, again, Pew Research data as of 5 years ago. The total Jewish affinity organization membership in North America is less than 1 million Jews, so it's about 750,000 total. Remember, the U.S. population alone is about 330 million. And that Jewish affinity organizations really represent Jewish American mega donors and stagnant career-long boards and officials whose careers and livelihoods depend on the money that comes into this industry. So the wealth is very, very concentrated. As an example, the Republican Jewish Congress, only 145 donors make up 76% of all funding. So remember, you have 750,000 Jews in these organizations, and only 143 of them make up 75% of funding to many of these organizations.
Absolutely. So in terms of traveling, we see that a part of the Jewish population is attached to Israel. I mean, if 43% of them travel to Israel, I would assume that they have some contact or some love for Israel. But there is a part of the population that never went there. And also, as far as the funding aspect goes, we're talking really about an elite that has taken on itself the role of funding. We're talking about a few hundred people who are funding most of the funding activities related to Jewish affinities.
That's correct. So before we do the sort of deep dive into the architecture of the organizations themselves, I think it's useful to talk about kind of 6 bullet points that I made up in advance that I think explain why this deep dive is warranted. And these are the excesses and corruptions that I mentioned in my introductory statement. So, JF, would you mind if I just rolled through these 6?
Absolutely, and these points are important because they are cases of abuse, demonstrable abuse, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, that's right. So the first is that this is a political influencing network that has very undocumented effects, or at least as you mentioned in your sort of introductory statement. They're not covered by the media, and these are 6 effects that I think need to be examined or at least audited. And again, my allegations here are as you would have at a preliminary hearing. This is not an allegation of corruption directly, so much as a presentation of evidence that warrants an audit. So, the first is the insertion of Israel or Jewish-related appropriations, mandates, and foreign policy or domestic policy initiatives into state legislatures and governments. And this is in no particular order. One of the things that made me very curious about this topic was learning that many of these organizations are not just national organizations, but they're what's called translocal organizations, meaning organizations that are not just national like the ADL or AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, or any number of the others we'll cover, but that there is a Jewish Federation and JCRC, Jewish Community Relationship Council, something that you'll hear about a lot here, in every major city center and state in America. And that it's not just that you'll learn about what the industry is doing by following the American Jewish Council or AIPAC or the ADL. This is happening really behind the scenes every day in every city. If you want to run for mayor or district attorney in Miami, you're going to need to go through the local Jewish Community Relationship Council. And this has recently been ratcheted up on steroids. So I'll give you some statistics that were very interesting to me as somebody who's worked in finance to learn. So state pension funds buy approximately $2 billion worth of Israeli government bonds every year. Israeli government bonds have about the same yield as U.S. bonds, and many states have had to pass specific legislation to repeal bans on foreign bond purchases in order to force their comptrollers to buy these unprofitable foreign country bonds. So typically, if you are a state pension fund, you need to get about an 8% return to keep the endowment at a profitable level, so that basic things like pension funds for firefighters and police officers can be funded, and teachers. U.S. bonds are usually not a big part of state pension funds because they only net like a 1.5% yield. It's the same thing with Israeli bonds. And now, to the extent that there are U.S. bonds that are purchased, it's usually because of a negotiation between the federal political structures and specific state legislatures to support American bonds. I mean, people need to buy bonds in order to have working capital for America to meet its budget. But these are foreign country bonds being bought billions at a time because state legislatures are beholden to their local Jewish federations and Jewish community relationship councils in order to advance the careers of the politicians who occupy state legislatures.
So we're talking about $2 billion total
in
terms of all states of the U.S., $2 billion total being bought in bonds from Israel?
Well, that was as of a couple of years ago. So it may be substantially higher now, given the enormous state, and I'll go through some of these state actions. More recently, the sort of Jewish Affinity Network has focused more and more on these state and translocal level politics rather than the federal level politics that we'll talk about with AIPAC and J Street and the Jewish President's Conference. So, but that's correct. As of I think it was 2014 or 2016. I'll have to look for the citation, but there's a great Grant F. Smith does some good work on compiling some of this data. So you can Google him as well. But another example of this is a 2011 California resolution, Bill ACR 65, where California, again, a U.S. state, passed resolutions that Israel's borders should be determined by the Israel government. I mean, this is the kind of thing that the federal government should be doing. This is the kind of thing a president or Congress does. This is like, imagine, JF, imagine if you lived in Miami and the city of Miami passes a bill saying that Israel has the right to shoot Palestinians at the border. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you're like, well, what exactly is going on here? What does Miami have to do with a plot of land halfway around the world that's a foreign nation? But as we go through this presentation, you'll learn that connection more and more.
This is a clear invasion of the federal duty to handle foreign affairs by a state, and I assume that this state was more easy to politically pressure for that kind of statement, and that's why it passed.
I wish that was the case, JF, but you'll start to see that this is not just the states you might expect, like California and New York, but this is South Carolina, this is Illinois, this is Florida, this is New Mexico. This is basically what happens is this, and we'll go over this more in detail. But the Jewish basically think tanks and major organizations that we'll cover, in particular the Jewish Agency and its Board of Governors, the Jewish President's Conference, which deals with influencing the executive branch, the World Jewish Congress and the American Jewish Congress, among several others, form a consensus about what the year's legislative priorities will be. And then not only is it lobbied for at the federal level, but there's a 50-state blanket, state-by-state march that these organizations do through every state in the country in order to in order to have not just federal control, but state and local control, so that there's no dissent even at a local level. So an example of this is the recent anti-BDS legislation. So this is the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement that Palestinian leadership basically formed as an international protest movement against what they framed as Israeli terror and Israeli corruption. I don't have a particular statement on that. As I've said before, I don't have any problem with Israel being, what it is. I just have the issue with excess and corruption, and that's what we'll cover. But essentially, this BDS movement was designed to present a nonviolent protest against Israeli infractions on the Palestinian people by boycotting Israeli goods, by divesting investments, that is, going after investors into Israeli companies or Israeli organizations, and by lobbying for international sanctions on Israel. So it was exactly what Black political advocates did in the civil rights movement in the 1960s with respect to nonviolent protest. It's what you're supposed to do. But what has happened is it was so successful early on that it became the number one priority for AIPAC and for the American Jewish Congress to make BDS illegal, to make it illegal to boycott Israel or to take any sort of economic action against it. And a good example of this is the fact that anti-BDS legislation, state by state, one at a time, in 24, I think it's up to 25 now, individual states in the country. And what this means is this: if you receive any money whatsoever from the state government, if you are a state university, if you're a public school, if you're a contractor doing construction on state land, if you're a park service, if you're an employee or independent contractor of any of those, if you participate in or have any affiliations with somebody who boycotts Israel.
Oh, I think we lost you. But yeah, the principle of this boycott is simply to use freedom of business. We lost you for a while. Frame Games, you're back now. Hello?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Where do...
just keep going at the where you were explaining the boycott. We lost you for like 10 seconds.
Okay. So what happens is now 25 states have state by state enacted this legislation that makes it illegal to boycott a foreign nation, Israel. So some crazy situations have popped up because of these laws. A famous one was the recent flooding in Houston, where there was emergency relief funds that were apportioned to the state of Texas so that people...
So we're losing you again. I hope that we will find a way to... Okay, now you're back.
Sorry. One more. I'll do this one more time. Sorry about that.
So
I'll switch
you were
to
talking about a
regular
specific
headphones.
case that got very well... Okay, you will switch here.
Yes. So, yeah, also, if this happens one more time, I'll switch to regular headphones instead of my nice microphone. But what happened in the state of Texas was these emergency relief victims needed to sign a pledge that they would not and have never boycotted the state of Israel in order to receive money by the state when their homes were destroyed by a damn near biblical flood in the city of Houston. So these were people who were, and there were hundreds of people who support Palestine and who support the BDS movement, who could not get funds for their house because of this state legislation. Now, another example of this is what's happening on college campuses. You have to understand a huge part of the youth division of the Jewish affinity organizations is control over local universities and colleges, often through Hillel organizations or Chabad, Lubavitch, or other organizations. And what's happened is, if you give a speech that promotes BDS in one of these 25 states, if you receive funds as honoraria, basically you're not allowed to receive funds. There was a great example of this recently, where somebody was slated to speak at a public university, a publicly funded university, and they were supposed to get money. But after the fact, the organizer said, sorry, this recent legislation prohibits us from paying you for this speech because you advocated for BDS, and this law would make it illegal for us. The university would actually get an enormous amount of trouble because we'd be breaking the law by letting you speak and having you pay for it. So this is that's 25 states, one by one. Now it gets crazier because this is now the tactic that's being used for every single item in the Jewish Affinity Organization agenda. So a recent one of this is Holocaust education. Now, I'm not making any statements about the Holocaust on this, here. All I'm doing is pointing out political influence and how the sausage gets made, so to speak. So I assume most people of my generation and learned about the Holocaust through studying World War II and in school. It was given deference and a place in American history where it was discussed, and it was discussed in the context of genocide. But there was no separate course that was required to be dedicated to it. Right? There's a lot of things you want to learn in life, like why is personal finance not taught in school? But what's happened is, very recently, as of 2015, which is when it first became a priority legislation piece of the annual APAC agenda, the goal is now to get all 50 states to pass state-required Holocaust education requirements in all public schools, so that you have these 6-month, semester-long dedications to the Holocaust, so that now in 2018, 70 some years after it happened, it is now crowding out other educational priorities. And this is to basically super prioritization. There's nothing like that for any other genocide, or really for any other historical period. I mean, you learn about U.S. history, but to have some cornfield public school in Iowa have to take 6 months out of their schedule to talk about the Holocaust in these is something that can be attributed to then political.
So we're still
influence.
losing you by some seconds sometimes. I don't know if you're able to reconnect with something else. Yeah, I will say on the side
I'll do that. Yeah.
While he does that, I will say on the side of the anti-boycott legislation, that is a way that is used for the state to impose consent, because then you're forced to sign this little paper that says that you will not boycott Israel. And so this is a way to force consent in businesses through state money. And this happens also outside of the Jewish community, but it's particularly shocking here to see it happen that way. As far as the education of children goes, we need to let the teachers decide what is best for children, and history courses are paramount in forming identity, in forming a sense of who you are in history. And it's not surprising that the Holocaust, which is a pillar of Jewish identity, when we ask Jews, what makes you Jewish? What do you think forms your identity most? The Holocaust comes as a top answer, a large part of the population. Are you back, Frame Games? Alright, he's still figuring out his connection issues. I will read some super chats while he finishes connecting. We have Mark McCall who says, keep up the great work, JF. Amar Bar says, I think expulsion has worked wonders. Okay, I will not read the rest. Secret Genius. Alt-right/white nationalism is disparate for fair and competent legal representation. Any thoughts or advice on that besides going to law school? Personally, my advice is not necessarily good for everyone, but my advice is learn the law, learn to defend yourself pro se, and make it costly to your opponents to ruin your life. Frame Games, are you back?
No, not quite.
Okay, I will read some other super chats. Amar Bear says, you need to go full 1488 wheat fields and shit, JF. Talking to Jewish people is the first thing we learn is the dumbest mistake smart people make. It's where the high IQ mixed with empathy fails us, brother. Well, in my career, I have always stick to one principle, which is the factual delivery. And so I don't judge people based on their affinity, on their religious adherence, or on their race. Ultimately, if I produce a show, I want this show to be factual. I care about the quality of the information. Oops, we're having a... Hello,
Hey, am I back now?
Yep,
All
you're
right.
back.
I'll definitely have this fixed for next time. I'm sorry about this. I think a cord got frayed. I'm a little concerned that if I switch to the headset, that I'll hear your voice when you talk. But I'll try that if this fails one more time. So, look, I bring up the Holocaust because that's a totally separate issue. We're not talking about that here. I just wanted to show an example of the state-by-state procession. So that's now this mandatory Holocaust-led education is, again, it started in 2015, and it's now up to 5 states: New York, California, Illinois, Florida, and I think Texas, but the 5th one may be a different one. But it will be all 50 states eventually within about 5 years, I estimate, because this is what these organizations will march towards, and you'll learn how they coordinate in this to come. But a great example of this, before we move on, JF, is South Carolina, because you, like most people, think, okay, well, this probably only happens in the states we'd expect, like New York and California. But South Carolina is a Southern Republican state, and this gets to why understanding ethnic politics is much more useful to supplement your conception of left-wing and right-wing than just stopping at left-wing and right-wing. If you didn't understand ethnic lobbying groups, then this would make no sense to you. South Carolina last month, April 2018, became the first state in the country to define anti-Semitism by law and ban all state dealings and organizations from receiving public funds, including education facilities, if they're deemed to be anti-Semitic. Now, you have to get a load of just how this legislation came to pass. First, it was not voted on as a separate bill. It was rolled into the very last paragraph of an appropriations bill. And I posted the link to it I'll post it to you here in the chat, JF, but I also put it on my synopsis sheet. And we can post that in the chat maybe. But here's the kicker. The definition of anti-Semitism in South Carolina, again, at a state level, adopted lock, stock, and smoking barrel, the ADL definition, which uses the 3 Ds. The 3 Ds are delegitimize, demonize, or double standard, and with respect to when criticism of Israel is deemed to be anti-Semitic. So the overall policy goal here of AIPAC and of the Jewish Agency is to make criticism of Israel deemed to be anti-Semitic, and anti-Semitic something that makes you lose your livelihood and political standing instantly. Therefore, by the transitive property, any criticism of Israel makes you lose your livelihood. You're not going to be able to feed your wife and kids if you criticize Israel. Now, think about what these 3 Ds are. Delegitimize Israel. Okay, that's pretty extreme, but maybe if they're our foreign ally, if they're our greatest ally, then maybe you can make an argument that because of geopolitical considerations, delegitimizing Israel is maybe there should be some protections for it. Again, that should be at the federal level, not at the state level. That's what the 10th Amendment is, right? That's what the reserve powers for the state are. This is not a state topic. This is a federal treaty situation, but the states are co-opted. Demonize. Okay, well, if you believe in hate speech laws, maybe the demonizing thing makes sense. But here's the kicker: double standard. And this is, by the way, how they get you every time. As an attorney, it's all about the frame games. It's all about how they word very specific words and then turn the entire legislation around a single word. Holding Israel to a double standard is now considered anti-Semitism and will get you defunded in the state of South Carolina. Now, think about what that means, JF. If you hold Israel to a double standard than, say, Nigeria, if, for example, there are war crimes in Nigeria and Israel is not as bad as Nigeria on them, then you're saying, well, you're holding Israel to a standard you don't hold other countries to. And you are therefore being anti-Semitic by not applying the same standard to every country. There's no way out.
This is ridiculously written as a law. It's aimed at encompassing any sort of criticism. I just want to read a part of this law. It's absolutely revolting. They define anti-Semitism, as you mentioned, as applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nations. So, I mean, some of the speech we may do here on the stream would qualify as anti-Semitism in South Carolina if we just say that Israel has a responsibility to be fair to Palestinians, or as a responsibility to respect the rights of Palestinians to their lands. I've already applied the double standards because no other nation has this behavior being requested of it. And so by the definition here, we would be committing acts of anti-Semitism by simply criticizing Israel. We cannot also accuse Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel. That's literally, I cannot tell that a single politician is being loyal to Israel more than he is to the US, even if he's a dual citizen.
Oh, JF, it's so much worse than that. Scroll up. See, this is what you learn in law school first thing. Everything we're saying, not just some of it, everything we're saying in this is deemed to be, would get you defunded in South Carolina. Here, can you pull that back on the screen? I'm going to point your attention to, this is 11.23, subheading B1. And here's what it is. It is any attack on Jewish community institutions. So it's not Jewish individuals, JF. Community institutions. If you say the ADL is having excess and corruption, if you say that the Jewish Federation of North America, if you criticize them, if you hold them to a double standard, if you hold them to a standard you don't hold, say, the local chess club to, that's anti-Semitism too. It's not just the people, it's everything. Do you understand?
It says a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. So it doesn't even have to be intended as hatred. If it can be expressed as hatred, then you would be committing anti-Semitism in South Carolina.
But it's Jewish community institutions, JF. It's not just the people.
Yeah.
It's any organization.
Any of their organization, their property, or community institutions and religious facilities.
Right. But understand, this is going to be litigated under that community institution thing. What that says is that, like, for example, one of the things that I was going to go over in historical crimes of Jewish organizations is the section on David Cole in the 1990s, a Jewish guy like me who, except he basically challenged certain elements of the mainstream historical record of what happened in Auschwitz. Take it what you will. I'm not weighing in on that. But what happened was the Jewish Defense League, which at the time was headed by Irv Rubin, who would later be arrested on felony charges for conspiracy to send a pipe bomb to Congressman Darrell Issa, put a $25,000 hit on a public website on David Cole's head, said, if you kill this man, you get $25,000, sent JDL, that is Jewish Defense League thugs, in a car to break his orbital bone, and basically forced him to change his name to David Stein, and drop out of the area of research that he was doing. He had to write an apology note. He had to recant everything. It was a lot like, Galileo saying, look, I'm not going to, again, weigh in on Holocaust stuff here, but he was forced to pen, an apology to get the bounty removed and recant all of his research. These are criminals. These are violent criminals who use pipe bombs and street violence. And if I were to attack the Jewish Defense League as a community institution, then I would not be allowed to receive. I can't be a teacher. I can't be a high school teacher in South Carolina. I can't get government aid if my house gets destroyed in a hurricane. I can't be an independent contractor building roofs for underprivileged children. This is corruption. And not only that, JF, notice that it was the very last paragraph of an appropriations bill.
And in addition,
it's not voted on by the people.
They are forcing the institutions who benefit from funding from South Carolina to distribute leaflets explaining this definition of anti-Semitism in their colleges and universities.
Yeah. So, I hope that this is, becoming clear, even though we're sort of just getting started. This is not good for Jewish people, in my opinion. As a Jewish person, I don't co-sign on this. This is horrible. This is an injustice. And it needs to be called out. And that's one of the reasons that we're doing the presentation we're doing today. It's about, if you love Jewish people, you will agree with the message of this episode.
All right.
Okay. All right, so I'll move on. So number 2 is the insertion of Jewish affinity organization operatives and affinity allies into federal agencies in a way that corrupts their objectivity. So an example of this, we could go through a bunch of them. We don't have time, I think, on this episode, from the Department of Homeland Security to the Department of State. But I think an instructive one for today's news is the FBI. The ADL is the Anti-Defamation League and many other Jewish organizations have a totally disproportionate influence over the Federal Bureau of Investigation in a way that most people have no idea about. The FBI is supposed to be a totally dispassionate, science-minded, nonpartisan organization that should show no deference to any particular group, particularly an ethnic lobbying group. So do you want to roll the clip now, JF, of the James Comey clip where James Comey declares his a love letter to the ADL?
Let's watch it now.
Thank you for your applause for the FBI, who are people who spend all day, every day, worrying about protecting the people you're worried about protecting as well. I last spoke to you, it was spring of 2014, and I was 7 months into this job. It seems like a lifetime ago. I was, I think, taller then. When I spoke to you 3 years ago, I sang your praises. I sang your praises and highlighted the way you fight for inclusivity and diversity, highlighted the way you fight for equality and justice. And I did that because at the time I described yours as an organization that works with us to fight hate crime and terrorism, educate law enforcement to build bonds of trust with important communities all over the country. I labeled that speech 3 years ago a love letter to the ADL. 3 years later, I can say from the perspective of the FBI, we are still in love with you.
All right, so he says that he is in love with an organization, an ethnic affinity organization in the US, the ADL.
Yes. Now, most people think that the FBI is its own organization, and the ADL has accumulated a lot of baggage over the years. The ADL has been involved in many, many crimes over the years, some of which they've actually been members have been indicted for. There was a recent espionage case in the 1990s where ADL agents were going through people's trash of political dissidents to dig up dirt on them and then selling that information to people around the world. So they've been involved in espionage. They've been involved in coercion and extortion. ADL operatives have actually stolen information from local police archives to get dossiers on their political enemies. A great example of this was, I think, I'll send you an article. I think it was in the LA Times, but this was where literally, because the ADL works with the FBI and does their hate speech training. I think of over 200,000 people a year. Here, I just posted this in the lobby, JF. Transcripts reveal 40 years of espionage by the ADL at local police departments in Los Angeles and San Diego, because what they do is they do individual hits on people, and we'll go over what those are. But it's not just the co-opting at a proactive level. It's also the absolutely insane number of presidential pardons and drop charges against people within the Jewish Affinity Network. These include presidential pardons for spies like Jonathan Pollard, for corrupt white-collar criminals like Mark Rich, Al Schwimmer, Stuart Nizet. The list goes on and on and on. And whenever there was an attempt by earnest individuals to prosecute these charges, AIPAC, there was a famous case where AIPAC pre-lined up anti-Semitism charges against the FBI and individual high-ranking members of the Bush administration to run ad space in the New York Times and other media organizations to take down people who would prosecute the case. This happened in 2005 when 2 AIPAC officials were caught passing on classified information. I can go into that case in detail, but it's an absolutely disgusting miscarriage of justice that's really on par with the O.J. Simpson trial, except that has been litigated in the public eye. These have not, which is why it's important that we talk about it. Again, as a Jewish person,
a complete inability of the FBI to inspect properly an organization that his own director says we are in love with. And the article that you sent me is a case of a spy operation, which revealed that there were spy operations by ADL members that spanned over 40 yereally mainly targeting particularly political dissidents and white nationalists?
Yes, but not just that. It's also other Jews who questioned the Jewish political hierarchy, as well as political enemies who were national and international in scope. And it's not just like white nationalists and people who are involved in that movement. It's also Muslims, people in the Black identity movements, like the ADL was instrumental in taking down the Black Panthers and other identity groups that aren't Jewish. So, it's very important to note that this is, this is really about preserving their power more than it is about stamping out the racism of any particular group. But I'll try to move on quickly through this material since I want to get into the deep dive here. But a few other points to note here are this abuse of tax-exempt status to make other groups pay for what are increasingly uncharitable activities. So most of these Jewish affinity organizations are structured as 501c4s. Okay, many of you have heard of 501c3s. That's the classic nonprofit organization in America. It allows you to, it allows donations to be tax exempt, so philanthropists can write them off. It allows for a number of protections because you're engaged in something for the public good. So 501c4 is very similar, except donations are not tax exempt. But it allows, but other than that, it's basically the same protections. In order to qualify as a 501c4, you have to be advancing the social welfare of the country. So, many of these organizations are organized under the auspices of Americans for Israel, and it's very clear what their mission statement has to do with advancing the social welfare of Israel, but it's not at all clear why they should be protected, not just financially, but also from scrutiny by 501c4 protection. 501c4s allow what are called dark pools, the bundling of money without the public needing to know where it came from, without needing to know the identities of donors. So 501c4s allow for soft dollar domination of the translocal political scene. And again, it's not just Jewish organizations. There's a million other lobbying groups, but this one is focused on the Jewish ones. Okay, so I'll skip ahead and say the last bullet point, the reason that we're talking about this is because of the specifically Jewish role in the diversity industry as the sort of centerpiece of various coalitions that are both ethnic and religious in scope. In the ethnic in the ethnic diversity industry, Jewish groups have, for 100 years played probably the center role in their development, in their rise, and their political operation, which includes both 1964 acts being drafted in a Reform synagogue, where the American Jewish Congress was housed. That's the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1964 Initial Voting Rights Act. These many people think that these are sort of nonpartisan bills, but they were drafted in synagogues with the in where the American Jewish Congress is housed. I mean, that's if you're not aware of those facts, then you're not going to be able to make good predictions about what the American organized political response will be to new legislation.
And at the public level, you've also documented on your own channel several cases of Jewish leaders teaming up with black leaders to participate in minority-aimed protest. You've documented the case of Starbucks, where we see a Jewish leader shaking hands with the black leader for a case of anti-black racism, or at least perpetrated anti-black racism. So they form alliance with other groups in the hope of pushing diversity messages.
That's exactly right, and it's much more than that, though, too. So that's I just talked about the ethnic diversity industry. What you just brought up was the ethnic coalition that these organized Jewish groups are involved with. The other prong of it is religious coalitions. So these are coalitions with local and national Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, and Black church groups, so that each one of those groups is either financially dependent on or wholly intermingled with Jewish advocacy groups in order for those groups' agendas to be pushed forward. So a great example of that we'll get to is on the role of local and state Jewish federations and JCRCs. Maybe we can skip to that now, actually, while we're on the topic. Do you mind doing that? Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I'm going to post right now for you to put in the chat an archived link to the director position of the Jewish Community Relations Council for the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. Now, this is just because I was going to do this linearly, but I think it's useful to go through this now to understand how things like the coalition groups that Jewish advocacy groups are involved with work. So if you scroll to the top, I'll take you through why we're talking about this. This is the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. So again, it's the political tip of the spear for Jewish people in Philadelphia. So here is an opening for the director position at this JCRC. And here's a little tour of the skills that you need in order to be the man or woman for this job. Okay, so here's a few things. Your job is to develop positive working relations. If you scroll down a little bit, there it is. I think it's just right there, the second one. Develop positive working relationships with spiritual and education leaders, various partner organizations, influential government officials. Your job is to develop positive working relations with influential government officials, policymakers, media representatives, and members of the community at large. Work with the Director of Government Affairs to develop, maintain, and strengthen relationships with public officials and coordinate advocacy efforts with the Pennsylvania Jewish Coalition, the state-level Jewish group. Develop strong connections with the interfaith community, and this is what you were just talking about, JF. Working on issues of mutual interest and concern, and maintaining a close relationship with the Religious Leaders Council of Philadelphia. So just so you understand how this works in practice, I'm going to send you now a link to the Jewish Stake in America's Changing Demographics to show you how these organizations use interfaith coalitions like churches. So I just posted this. And you'll see here in about halfway down in the subsection saying abandoning the field to nativism and xenophobia, there's a paragraph where Stephen Steinlight, another Jewish fellow who's the head of the Center for Immigration Studies at the time, said, "We need to rescue it," being the debate, from the influence of those who understand America not in terms of its abstract constitutional principles, but as blood and soil. And then saying that Pat Buchanan's Reform Party in the 1990s had to be taken out of public conversation. His view on limiting immigration should not be allowed to be a partisan issue that Americans can vote on, which means we need to get both Republicans and Democrats to no platform Pat Buchanan's widely popular Reform Party. But notice the last sentence in this paragraph, JF. Now, I'll read the last two sentences aloud so that you guys all have it. We are advocating the design of policy closer to where the American people... Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just read this whole thing, okay? It says, it must be admitted that Pat Buchanan's attitude about immigration clearly resonates with the majority of Americans, unlike the popular Jewish open borders stance. Every time representative samples of Americans are presented an option on immigration, they support limiting it, though it's usually couched in the context of a 5-year moratorium instead of a full stop. So he's saying, look, the Jewish community's open border stance is not what the American people want. Democratically, they would vote on closed borders if they could. And then he's saying, we're advocating the design of policy closer to where the American people are, but that we have to morally educate them to extend the parameters of their sense of community. And here's the kicker. The last line, here is a good role for the church. So this is what they're going to get the church organizations, the Christian Zionist organizations, the Black church organizations to advocate for in exchange for seed funding and for money and political muscle.
So this is literally people who are caught planning, and they say, by the way, the Americans don't like immigration, so we're going to have to find a way to sell it to them, and they say, here's a good role for the church.
Oh, it's worse than that, JF. It's not finding a way to sell it to them. It's preventing their political leaders from putting it on the ballot. He's saying if it was up to them, they'd vote on it. So what we need to do is we need to take advantage of representative democracy and the fact that leaders don't need to pass bills. It's not direct voting for the people. We can just make it so that anyone in office never puts up a bill that allows for open immigration. Because if they do, the wrath of the Jewish Affinity Network will come down on them. Now, listen, I want to take a pause here and say, if this is upsetting to people in the chat, please take a deep breath and don't get angry. We're not advocating demonizing here. This is about an audit, and people need to have the facts so that they understand how the political system in the country works. So please keep that in mind. And if you need to do a lap, do it. It's not going to get better from here. Okay, so let's turn back to the JCRC job description for a minute, JF, if you will.
All right.
Okay, so you'll notice later on in the description, it says that the director of this JCRC is going to need to work with the senior manager for Holocaust programming for continued meaningful Holocaust education programming. So again, this has nothing to do with, this is just a political advocacy organization, which, by the way, you're not allowed to do if you're a 501c4. You're not allowed to advocate for political. If you're a nonprofit, you're not allowed to be. You're not allowed to engage directly in politics. But they get around that by saying it's for religious
education.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then another one here is the job description requires you to implement the JCRC's vision through assessing and defining needs, concerns, and interests of the local, national, and international Jewish communities that inform the JCR's agenda. Determine areas of coalition building with non-Jewish community. So this is really the crux of it all. It's all about coalitions. It's coalition politics. And if you don't see it through this lens, you're not going to understand how organizations like Christians United for Israel and other left-wing organizations and right-wing organizations especially have come to be beholden to the Jewish mega-donor base in part. Again, lots of other lobbying groups out there. So with that as a setup, how are we doing on time, JF? Because I want to now talk about the organization specifically.
We're not limited on time at all. You should take your time to explain everything you want to explain. I'm not tired, and I'm shocked by what we're learning. So let's move forward however you like. Okay,
great. So now I think is the time to get technical and historical, and talk about things that most people who are involved in free speech online movements, we all know about the ADL, right? And we all know about the excesses of hate speech policing. Where in the UK you can get thrown in jail for quoting rap lyrics and other excesses. I like to think of organizations like the ADL and AIPAC and the other sort of low-hanging fruit groups that most people talk about as being like the messenger in the movie 300. You ever see 300, Chip?
Yeah.
So the beginning of the movie. Yeah. So the beginning of the movie, the Spartans are just doing their own thing, and then this messenger comes to town and says, "By the way, Xerxes is going to bow to Xerxes, do whatever Xerxes says, or else basically there's this entire Persian army that the messenger represents, and the Spartans don't know about that yet. All they know about is this asshole messenger has just made these completely unwarranted threats to their livelihood, and they have no idea that the wrath of the entire Persian army is about to come down on them. And what they do is they defiantly kick the messenger down the well, and they focus all of their anger and all of their, they focus on the messenger, not on the army behind it, on the tip, not on the iceberg, so to speak. What I want the people who are watching this to understand is that when you hear about the ADL or when you hear about AIPAC, don't think of it. That's not the army. That's not Persia. That's just the messenger. Okay. What we're going to talk about tonight is the army itself. What are all of these organizations? How do they interrelate? How are they financed? What are their tactics? What have they done historically? What are they doing currently? And what does the, basically political military organization, how is it structured? And I say that sort of tongue in cheek. I don't mean to demonize it as being, literally military, but it is organized with the same efficiency, precision, and hierarchy. So with that said, we're going to jump into the hierarchy.
Absolutely, and when we view job postings like this is the tip of the iceberg. There are presumably hundreds of jobs like this in the US, and it's important to understand the cash flow that leads to these jobs existing, which comes from mega donors who have so much money that they're willing to pay someone full-time to do that kind of stuff, which may not look in and of itself a big thing, but it's the mass of people who are working in the Jewish lobby that does represent a huge effect on the American democratic system.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to break this up into two different types of Jewish affinity organizations. One of which is focused on Israel specifically, and the other is that is the welfare of the foreign nation of Israel. And the other is on the advocacy of the welfare and promotion of the welfare of the domestic interests of Jewish individuals living in diaspora nations like myself, right? Because they have a different structure. And I think I'm going to cover both of them briefly because there's a lot to go over. And then I think in the next episode in the series, we're going to talk more in depth about each of these. But there's so many of them that it's worth doing an episode on a broad overview. So by my estimation and the work of the scholars that I filed to follow to compile this, I'm sorry, let me start with the Zionist organizations, just so we can get them out of the way.
All right.
The top dog of the Zionist organizations, that is the explicitly Israel organizations, is an organization called the Jewish Agency, which was and here's, just so you can see the about me, I'll just send you some links if you care to post them or pull them up. So the Jewish Agency was founded in 1929. It dubs itself the world's first responder for coordinating worldwide Jewish responses to issues concerning Israel. Much like the World Zionist Council, the American Zionist Council, and others, they are Israel-focused, and what they do is they interface with AIPAC and J Street and the President's Council and other major organizations that do Israel lobbying, but they don't, for example, weigh in on issues like hate speech laws, right? That's one of the things that distinguishes them and the World Jewish Congress and others that we'll get to. They relate to Israel concerns and and the influence of Israel advocacy in diaspora countries. They have something which is called the Governor's Board. The Governor's Board of the Jewish Agency. I'll see if I can just pull up a quick link for you here. But the Governor's Board is really where all the decisions get made, the Jewish Agency Board of Governors. And what this is a very sort of select crew of millionaires, billionaires, and huge, international influencers that make the policy decisions for what the Zionist organizations should focus on, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis, and on a sort of 8K basis, on a sort of, emergency as it comes up basis. And what happens is the Jewish Agency interfaces with the World Zionist Organization to basically disseminate these policy objectives and talking points and influencer preferred tactics to every member state around the world. So, for example, we're going to talk about two things over the course of this lecture. One of them is ZCs, and the other one is JCs. So ZCs are Zionist councils. And JCs are Jewish councils. So there's something called, for example, the World Zionist Council, the WZC, which as part of it, has member states. There's an American Zionist Council, a Canada Zionist Council, a European Zionist Council. Often you'll have not just councils for the country, but councils for the continent. So, for example, there's an American Zionist Council. There's a North American, there's a German one, but there's also a European one, and all of these have what is akin to a parliamentary seat at the Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Congress. World Zionist Council. I don't want to focus too much on these organizations, though. They're their own beast, but it's a separate issue from talking about identity politics, writ large. This is sort of when you start talking about Israel, Israel advocacy, it starts to muddy with foreign relations. And what I'm concerned about in this lecture mostly is domestic. How does this affect you as an American? If you want to run for mayor of your town, how does this affect you? If you want to wonder, why is it that people are not, why is it that Trump is not taking action against hate speech laws? Why is there no political will for it, even though it seems to be popular to repeal hate speech laws in the UK with things like Brexit and other proxies? This is why, and or at least this is a large part of it. So I'm now going to focus on domestic influence,
right.
And to do that, I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to start with an organization called the World Jewish Congress. So the World Jewish Congress, much like the World Zionist Council, they're structured in essentially the same way. Every country, it's over 100 countries, have a Jewish Congress in them. Okay, it was founded in 1936, so this was shortly before the start of World War II. And the World Jewish Congress is, it exists for international coordination of all Jewish groups worldwide, again, in over 100 countries. So every single country and continent that has a Jewish Congress reports up to the World Jewish Congress. It was founded and run by sort of a combination of a Jewish mega-donor billionaire and a very influential Brooklyn rabbi, and the two of them started this sort of long ago. It had a number of precursor organizations dating back to 1917, and it is what the AJC, the American Jewish Congress, reports up to, and also receives funds and international political support from the top down. Okay, so some famous examples of the WJC stepping in are it had an enormous influence on President Truman and the forming of Israel itself. Again, I don't want to demonize Israel. I do want to be honest, though, and say that it's very hard to think of to understand the process of Israel's founding without understanding that President Truman did not want Israel to be founded as a purely Jewish state. He wanted a two-state solution where it didn't displace 700,000 Palestinians. He wrote about this at length in his journal. He opposed the sort of Jewish strong-arming tactics at every turn. And there's a fantastic article I'm going to send you right now that covers this. It covers it inadvertently because this article is basically a Jewish journalist, I believe, saying this is why Jews shouldn't lionize Harry Truman, but he inadvertently covers an entire history of how Harry Truman was strong-armed into supporting supporting the World Jewish Congress and World Zionist Council desires for Israel's founding, because otherwise they were going to destroy the Truman administration. They were going to primary him and all of his top lieutenants. They were all of New York Jews were going to be basically organized to basically take control of Jewish politics in New York and wrench away a key sort of foothold of the Truman administration. And I encourage everyone to read this article if you want to put it in the chat. it's pretty amazing. But it shows an early influence of the World Jewish Council. I'm sorry, World Jewish Congress, which again coordinates everything. So it coordinates the American Jewish Congress. It coordinates the Canadian Jewish Congress. It coordinates the German, the African, the European. This is, I don't want to say conspiracy, but this is planning. If there's not another word for it, this is mass top-down organized worldwide action. It just is what it is. So some examples of that include WJC campaigns to take down British historian David Irving, Holocaust revisionist Ert Sundell in the 1990s. WJC coordinated lawfare from dozens of different groups that sued. It coordinated press campaigns, bought up international newspapers, and it provided legal representation. It's basically, they got your back. Let's just say it that way. They are the umbrella group.
So they can be used to target individuals who engage in trying to search the truth as historian, for example, and they coordinate campaigns against politicians.
Against politicians, against individuals, like, for example, I mentioned David Irving. David Irving, the historian whose house was fired. I guess that was Sundell's house was firebombed. But Irving was famous for his libel case, and a number of sort of Hollywood movies demonizing him. And Irving's history led to the Holocaust legislations of the 1990s in Europe that widely banned the study of the Holocaust as being anti-Semitic hate speech. It was because of Irving's influential historical accounts on the matter. Again, not weighing in on that stuff here. I'm just telling an honest history of how of the evolution of how we got here. So, but for an example of that is, if you have a political enemy, what the World Jewish Congress will do is you'll have the international media essentially coordinated. So if you want to run a campaign against Marco Rubio, for example, it might be useful not just to get the American media and American lawyers guilds against Marco Rubio. It might be useful to also get political allies like the UK and France. It might be useful to get all sorts of public relations, organizations from around the world to coordinate at the same time to make somebody basically politically jeopardized or able to be sued into bankruptcy or any number of other extortionary tactics, usually including the use of a scoreboard, which we'll get into in our APAC decision. By the way, do you need to pause for super chats? I know I'm going through this stuff quickly.
Oh, yeah, I think we can take a pause also for you to relax your voice. Let's have a look at what the crowd is saying. Amar Bear says, get Enoch here to push this guy's boundaries. I like Mike Enoch, but I prefer hearing Frame Game and what he has to say on his factual report. Then we can discuss with Mike at some point. David says, I know Frame Game is actually a Jew. Oh no, I will not read this one. First name, last name, you're a troll. I don't read your super chats anymore. Olus Invictus, $10, thank you. Andrew J says, was this passed when Nikki Haley was governor? She is bought and paid for by Israel. I'm not aware of Nikki Haley.
Yeah, well, Nikki Haley has sort of this right-hand man, John Lerner, who's sort of her primary backer. I mean, what you have to understand, JF, is that 70% of the top 10 donors to the DNC are Jewish, and 80% of the top 10 donors to the RNC are Jewish. Now, it's basically what happened is, after 1964, when Barry Goldwater was demolished in the presidential election, he was one of only a handful of people who 1964 civil rights legislation that overhauled American commerce and made it basically illegal to have freedom of association in business. There's a lot of takes on that. In my view, it has both positives and negatives, but the negatives have been exploited to an ungodly degree. It formed diversity in industry. But basically, after 1964, the Republican Party was facing total wipeout, total defeat, like the Whig Party in the UK. And what they did is they turned to Israeli money at that point and became that's what sort of birthed the neoconservative movement and the Bill Kristols, the Podhoritzes, all of the neocons like the Bushes and the the Rubios and everyone we now know and love today. That the wheels of that started in 1964 when, having lost the battle of the culture war of the 1960s, they basically sold themselves to the Israel lobby and to domestic Jewish groups and money and influence from those groups in order to mount a sort of political comeback, salvaging what they could while becoming a completely 100% Israel first sort of political organization, which is what neocon philosophy is. But that's what happens, how we got here on the Republican side.
It's a huge amount. If 70 or 80% of the top donors of political parties are Jewish billionaires or millionaires, this is a mass of money entering into the political system, and the only way to survive in that political system, I assume then, is to bend your policy to respect the wish of your donors.
Yes, at least in part, right? There's a lot of other mega donors who are not a part of the Israel lobby. It's just that the vastness of the Israel lobby is something that's breathtaking. The vastness and foreignness of it are just pretty unprecedented. Like there's an AJC scorecard on every single sitting member of Congress. Every single one of the 535 members of Congress has an individual dossier on them where they get a report card, A, B, C, D, E, F, depending on how they vote on every vote. And we're going to get to that later on the section on APAC votes, what are called APAC votes. But again, don't think this. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before we get there, I will keep reading. Stav says, in my opinion, these laws are a good thing. It shows how desperate they are becoming to keep their power structures intact. The kind of overreaching legislation will always backfire in the end. I don't share your positivism, Stav. These are very worrying things that I hear today. I will give you the example of Europe. Hate speech laws in Europe have not backfired. They have gained popular adherence. They have convinced the people of these nations that they had to be willing to welcome as much immigrants as were demanded of them. And so careful with the backfire. If it doesn't come in time, populations do get replaced, and populations get this feeling of overwhelming desire for generosity to the other. I do not share your positivism at all. The Bad Virus says Kennedy and Nixon both tried to blow the whistle on Israeli infiltration into the US. They both got burned one way or another. Happy Boy says John Podesta, I will not read this one, it's a false allegation and a troll. A Fistful of Shekels says should have converted them to Christianity goy. David Hume says Christ Cox BTFO in reference to the here's a roll for the church comment. Fernando Covet says, by the way, Owen B dismissed you as a sociopath at the end of his stream today and won't debate you, and Crowder stated Hamas as a charter against Jews. Well, to both Crowder and Owen, I say clearly you are not interested in displaying any sort of journalistic ethic. I have pointed out on the public space yesterday that your reporting contains lies, and you are responding, oh, this guy is a sociopath, or oh, there are other facts in the Hamas charter that I forgot to point to. What you said on the public space were lies. I keep my accusation. I'm not interested in debating these guys if they won't engage on facts. These are journalistic frauds. The Bad Virus, 20 pounds, thank you so much. Mossad Le Aliyabet. Translation: the Agency for Secret Immigration to Palestine, or in other words, secret passage out of Germany and Poland via trains to Italy and then by boat through the Mediterranean to Palestine. I don't know what you're talking about, so I can't comment. Tesla says, I want to encourage the people watching this to donate to our organizations and leaders, be it TPS, Frame Game, American Renaissance, ID Europa, NPI, etc. They need more money to be able to fight our well-funded adversaries. And on that note, we will move on to describing the rest of the report by Frame Game. And I will say also, if you don't have money to donate, one way you can popularize this stream is by talking about it, by tweeting about it on Twitter, on your social media. Just spread the word. This Frame Games brings factual reports that are long and in-depth. They are worth sharing.
All right, great. Thanks, Jeff. So I'll continue moving through this a little non-linearly. We were just on the subject of congressmen scorecards. And I just sent you a link in the lobby if you want to post it. It's a Google search for the Simon Wiesenthal Center's hate report card. If you show that individual image, and then I'll show you the article from which it comes. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess it's the first one, I believe. But either I just wanted to pull it up, or the second one. But essentially what it is, it's a blown up image. Yeah. And it shows these report cards for all the different all the major social media platforms and how they rank in terms of basically protections for Jewish influence and protections against anti-Semitism and things like that. The recent 2017 one, nobody gets an A by the way. Nobody gets an A on their congressman or their hate report cards. If they did, the Simon Wiesenthal Center wouldn't have a business model, right? The best you can get is an A minus. But you'll notice that things like Gab,
model of never being satisfied, always be in the fight to improve the state of Israel's interest in the country.
Well, right, because as I say, victimhood voltage is an asset, not a liability. It's a net operating loss. That it's an asset. It's the loss is not a bad thing. But I just wanted to point that out. This is how the scorecard works for all 535 members of Congress. Which so we just covered the AJC a little bit. That's where I believe we left off. The American Jewish Congress, which reports up to the World Jewish Congress. The American Jewish Congress was sort of formed in opposition to the American Jewish Committee, which at the time had a lot of German Jews that were not on board with a lot of the pro-Zionist and aggressively pro-Jewish ethnic politics that came to dominate the Jewish organizations in the 1920s and 30s. And I want to say again, for those who get upset listening to this, and I want to stress, not taking it out on people, but thinking of this at an organization, institution level, it is my position that the malevolent aspect of ethnic identity politics from the Jewish lobby did not occur until the 1920s. There were four phases, and I'll take a brief detour for history here. There were four phases of Jewish organization in the United States. The first started in the 1940s with the founding of two organizations, B'nai B'rith, which would later go on to be the network we now know, and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which was designed to basically make it easy for Jewish immigrants to integrate into the U.S. Out of B'nai B'rith, as B'nai B'rith grew, it was initially just a lodging system for Jews to network and have some solidarity. In the 1990s, they began to flex their political muscle. This is phase two. This was with the advent of Zionism and the organization of sprawling sort of Jewish groups in order to get Jews to Palestine, run arms to them, and start to flex the initial stages of political influence, much as Catholic groups and Protestant groups did. But what happened in the 1920s is they went way, way, way too far. That's when the ADL formed. That's when the AJC formed. That's when you had what is now, as I have cataloged it, well over 4,000 oriented political Jewish groups in America, of which the top 350 are sort of the focus of this network. They all do slightly different things. For example, when we talk about, well, okay, I'll just move through it linearly from here. So the problems really started with this 1920. It was taking it way, way, way too far. So now the American Jewish Congress, they bill themselves as being an umbrella organization organized to defend Jewish interests at home and abroad through public policy advocacy using diplomacy, legislation, and the courts. So the AJC is for lawfare and for political influence, whereas things like the ADL, are more for hit pieces and destroying political enemies. All right, so now we're going to move to two twin organizations, one of which probably, AIPAC, and the other of which you probably don't, which is the it's called the COP, the President's Conference, and that is the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. The AIPAC is designed for Jewish political control or significant influence over our legislature in America. And the President's Conference, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, is designed to have control over the executive branch. That is the president, the departments like the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the Department of Education. Any executive branch gets the AIPAC treatment via the President's Conference. So I'm going to start with the President's Conference just because a lot of people don't understand its vast influence. What it is it's 51 national Jewish organizations who meet, again, annually, quarterly, and on an emergency basis as well. And there's dozens of full-time professionals. These are the big wigs. Basically, the top people from these 51 Jewish organizations all meet and confer for this conference, which is developed. It was founded to develop a consensus voice among Jewish organizations in all dealings with the American executive branch. And there's lots of examples throughout history of the President's Conference strong-arming American presidents. It was founded in 1956 at a number of predecessor organizations. But when you read about the history of the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson and much sort of related to the 1967 war and America's political reaction to that, the COP was a major player. Basically, you don't see them, you don't hear them, but they are the chief. They're AIPAC for presidents and executives. And
so what we've
according
seen
to their
with
own,
James Comey sending a love letter to the ADL, that is just one example, but there's a strategy deployed to talk to the top executives of all branches of government.
Yes, well, except arguably the judiciary, right? I mean, you could argue that the Supreme Court is independent, right? There's three branches of government, the legislative, the executive. The only thing you can vote on, though, right, is who's president and who your congressman is. It's the only thing you have electoral control over. AIPAC and J Street, there's a number of other organizations, but AIPAC and the President's Conference basically make sure that Jewish interests are promoted. If not first, then, their job is to make sure they're promoted first, and then America's interests come second. That's what bothers me as a Jewish person, right? Why are you making me choose between my values as an American and my values as a Jewish person? I mean, I love so much about our culture, but I'm familiar with the organizational setup, and I think, listen, there's a major tension here. Do I want America first, or do I want what's best for identity politics of a group that I'm a part in? And then if I consider myself to be a free speech advocate or somebody who's against identity politics, I can't do that in good faith while these organizations still have the power they do. So anyway, I'll get to the President's Conference and the history of them maybe in another stream, because it's so vast and it's so ugly, in my opinion, that it really deserves a deeper detail. But I do want to get now to AIPAC, and I want to clear up a bunch of misconceptions about it. And also just tell you really, really how it works, so that when you hear the word AIPAC, these data points are really grouped into it. Okay, a brief history. AIPAC is a 501c4 organization. Again, so donations aren't tax deductible, but it's all dark money. And because of that, they are not allowed to. I'm sorry. AIPAC started in the 1950s when the Kennedys wanted to get the American Zionist Council to register as a foreign agent under FARA, the Foreign Agent Registrations Act. Yeah. And what's important about this is that AIPAC is the only foreign country advocacy group in the world, in America, that does not have to register under FARA. Now, why is it important that we care about FARA? Well, if AIPAC had to register under FARA, arguably this entire ecosystem would collapse, at least temporarily until it regrouped. FARA is that important. What FARA does is it requires everything an organization, a foreign country's lobbying group does, be public, 100% public. Everybody you talk to, everybody you get money from, everybody you give money to, all of your contacts, everything has to be above board. So there can be no soft money, a concept we'll get to later. There can be no soft money. Everything has to be hard. Everything has to be above board. There's no dark money in FARA if you're registered under FARA, because it all has to come to light. And what happened was the American Zionist Council was putting an enormous amount of pressure on the Kennedy administration, and was also engaged in some very dirty dealings, including stealing uranium, espionage rings, a lot of things that really bothered the Kennedys. And so the Kennedys made the AZC, the American Zionist Council, register under FARA. And AIPAC at the time was an unincorporated, unregistered committee within the AZC. You'll notice this structure pattern a lot, because this is how JCRCs operate within Jewish federations. Jewish Community Relations Councils, which I talked about earlier and we'll get to later, do not have to register. They are just, it's like the dinner table at a house. You don't need to register a deed for your dinner table, but that's where the dinner is. That's where the food is. That's where the action is. So what happened was the AZC and the Jewish Affinity Network resisted FARA registration enormously. They tried everything they could to get out of it, but they couldn't. And eventually what they did is they registered the AZC under FARA, and they spun off a new organization called AIPAC. And what they did is they used essentially a legal trick. Its founder did, this guy, I.L. Keenan, and he defined AIPAC not as a lobby for a foreign state, but for Jewish Americans who support that state. And so that way, under FARA, you're banned from participating in American elections. I guess I already went into all that stuff, but so that was allowed to stand. And just so you understand the opposition, here's a quote from Douglas Bloomfield, who was a former AIPAC lobbyist, reacting to the pressure to get AIPAC to register under FARA. He said, "The president's proposal to require lobbyists to disclose each contact may result in treating citizen lobbying groups, such as local Jewish community relationship councils, the same as corporate and labor lobbying groups."
Some lawmakers may be dramatic to me.
Some lawmakers may be hounded into producing lists of their lobbyists, including unregistered lobbyists and other constituents they meet. This could easily inhibit the willingness of lawmakers to meet with AIPAC and discourage participation by lobbyists who fear becoming public targets. That is, if it all became above board, then you know as much about the Israel lobby as you know as much about Monsanto or the gun lobby or any of the, it's like, oh my God, you're going to treat our lobby like everybody else. I'm sorry, that's a double standard.
He's recognizing that if what he does would be public, people would be offended.
They'd be outraged. And that's what this hinges on. And that's why it requires a full-scale accounting. So that's the history of AIPAC. Very, very, it was basically, Lyndon Johnson basically secured the future of AIPAC forever. And then it got so powerful that now the idea of challenging it would require a total replacement of all the major power players in the GOP and half of the DNC.
So it's an outgrowth of a group that exists originally just to escape the FARA regulation, but that has now become a major political actor controlling major parts of American democracy.
Right. That's exactly right. So, and I don't want to get into the Kennedy, like the weird timing with them reorganizing under as AIPAC and the death of the Kennedys. But it's just weird. I'm not putting that out there as anything that I support or don't support. It's just there's a lot of weird stuff. But there was no organized resistance to the Israel lobby after Kennedy. So it is interesting to keep that in mind. But now let's talk about how AIPAC works. As I mentioned, all 535 people have relations individuals assigned to them. They're given scoreboards. They're given money on the basis of whether or not they're an A, B, C, D, or E. It looks like that. So, and not just that, you need to sign a pledge to Israel in order to get AIPAC money. AIPAC money is enormous, by the way, and it's not just the hard money that they give. Much of it is the soft money because they connect you to the translocal donor network. So AIPAC doesn't give that much money directly. The real power is that if you're friends with AIPAC, you're friends with the network, and they hook you up. But then they say, it's not us. We're not engaging in political activism. We're not endorsing. They have a strict policy that they don't endorse or they don't endorse the election of a particular candidate. But everybody around them does. They give money on the basis of that. I mean, it's the Clinton Global Foundation all over again, right? I mean, it's just doing things that you're not allowed to do by creating some NGO that does it and that you control. It's very easy. So one of the things that a lot of people don't know about is that you need to sign this Pledge of Allegiance to Israel to get Israel money. Even if, again, you're just a cornfield senator from Iowa, no offense, I say that with love, or if you're representing, some mountain district in West Virginia, you need to take a loyalty oath to put Israel first. So I'm going to show you how this works. First, this used to be public, and then it's gone through a few different iterations. I think the most instructive one is to see the current pledge that you need to sign in the UK. So I'm going to send this to you right here. I just put it in the chat or in the lobby. And here's an example of the pledge that UK parliamentarians need to sign if they want to get AIPAC, or if they want to get what's the equivalent of AIPAC money. That is Jewish Affinity Network money. Here's the text of the pledge. If elected to the United Kingdom Parliament, I pledge 1, to support the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, working definition of anti-Semitism. Remember, I read that to you earlier. That involves the 3 Ds, saying it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel and unlawful to. It's going to be even worse there, right? Because they have literal hate speech laws that criminalize it. But you need to embrace their working definition. That is going to be the law in the UK in a few years. I mean, just think about that.
They essentially impose the use of their definition of anti-Semitism to anyone receiving money.
And remember, that's criticism of any Jewish community institution. If I wanted to just say, hey, the Jewish Defense League shouldn't have put a bounty on David Cole's head, I'm now engaging in illegal anti-Semitism. But again, this is what you need to do. Here's the pledge. Okay, here's another one. To promote the HM government, to promote trade with Israel that will increase investments and jobs for people in both countries. Now, both countries is insane, right? I mean, if you want to be a member of parliament in Britain, you need to pledge to increase jobs in Israel. It says, we believe, okay, so look, I mean, you can read on your own time if you want.
So was this signed by, oh my God, they give the list here of people who signed this? Those are elected UK representatives? Yep.
These are all people who are running for it. So these are all people in the latest election. And the same thing. The same thing is true in the U.S. Except now they got rid of this particular language because a lot of people, after Cynthia McKinney, first broke it. She was a former congressman. They've now changed it, I think, from a pledge, which looked too much like a dual citizenship pledge of allegiance, to a letter of support. Which I can get the text for you another time, but I want to keep going through the material here. This is at this time you might want to. Oh, by the way, some other things on the pledge are that you have to vow to reject all boycotts against Israel, and to support Jewish culture, business, and promote Jewish business, educational, religious, and other connections in Israel without fear of boycotts. And then at the very end, they say particularly the rejection of boycotts. So really trying to clamp down on any kind of nonviolent, organized opposition to Israel. But look, if you want to lower taxes, if you want to run on a policy of lowering taxes in the UK, you got to sign the paper to make sure that Israel and the Israel lobby gets its cut. So, all right, but now let's turn back across the pond to America. So, there are a number of very interesting exposés. Oh, by the way, this might be an interesting time to play the clips that I mentioned before the show, JF, where Cynthia McKinney and Earl Hillard and James Traficant, among others, were whistleblowers on this. So I don't, this is from this is just a clip that it takes positions that I don't take, but has some. A lot of these clips were removed from YouTube, so the easiest way that I found to find it was just in this particular video. But if you start about 3:15 on it, you'll see Cynthia McKinney's testimony about what she went through under Israel. And then right before you start it, JF, I'm going to say an important part of the AIPAC strategy is not just providing you funding, because you could argue, well, why don't people just not take the money? There's two answers to that. One, it's a lot of money, but that's fine. Not everyone is beholden to it. Not everyone in Congress is. But the other one is that if you don't, AIPAC makes it extremely painful to not take the money, because what they do is a variety of tactics. First, they primary you. There's a tactic of, if you're an incumbent and you don't take the money, they will try to prop up other people to run against you. They will, whatever amount of money that you thought you were going to get, there are accounts of them funding your political opponent 3 times what you would have gotten just for not being on board. So basically, it's a culture of fear. And there's a lot of testimonies that I've found compiled about staffers on the Hill who talk about this at length, and it's very interesting to hear what they say. Even Jewish members, like some great someone, I'll send you this in case you want to check it out, JF.
And
here's a link to one.
Examples of politicians being turned over by some other members of their party, and then the press dumping all sorts of allegations on politicians. I think Trump is the most clear case of this, where there's more than 12 allegations of sexual assault that all happened during his campaign. These, to me, are expressions of a deeper network of coordinated interest. Yeah.
So, oh, sorry. It's this one that I just sent you. So this article that I just sent you does a good job of explaining this in detail. But essentially, AIPAC, you're not supposed to talk about the money. This guy, Kirk Beattie, basically, talked to a ton of people on the Hill about it. And, he said that young Jewish American staffers told him, don't talk about the money with AIPAC. And that the reason AIPAC is so successful is because it's just so much better than competing lobbying groups, to a great degree, because its human and material resources are huge by comparison. They have 50 times the personnel and 50 times the money. Now, here is JF, I'm going to direct you back now to the article we pulled up before by Stephen Steinleit, The Jewish Stake in America's Changing Demographics.
All right.
And I'm going to, if you run a word search for campaign finance, this is, I believe, it's under the section called Facing Up to the Gradual Demise of Jewish Political Power. This was an article written in 2001. Again, by a Jewish author who was a, executive director of the Institute for, the Immigration Center for Immigration Studies.
Link again? I think I'm not finding it.
Sure. Here you go. One moment. And I just put it in the lobby.
All right.
So you can just do a Control F for campaign finance. And
all right.
No, actually, we'll start with the phrase political power, because it's important to note that this article was about preserving Jewish political power in the face of changing demographics. And here, well, actually, I'll start with the quote we started with so that I'm not jumping around too much. So here he notes that if you run a control search for campaign finance reform, he says, facing up to the gradual demise of Jewish political power. He says, not that is the case that our disproportionate political power, pound for pound, the greatest of any ethnic or cultural group in America, will erode all at once or even quickly. And he's talking about with the rise of Mexican immigration and Muslim immigration. We will be able to hang on to it for perhaps a decade or two longer, unless and until the triumph of campaign finance reform is complete, an extremely unlikely scenario. The great material wealth of the Jewish community will continue to give it significant advantages. We will continue to court and be courted by key figures in Congress. That power is exerted within the political system from the local to national levels through soft money, and especially the provision of out-of-state funds to candidates sympathetic to Israel, a high wall of church-state separation, meaning church organizations can't organize against Jewish or Israeli organizations, and social liberalism combined with selective conservatism on criminal justice and welfare reform. So understand what he's saying here is basically just an acknowledgement of what I'm saying in this section. It's because of translocal soft money control over politicians. But all right. So let me turn back to this. You can find AIPAC's direct donations on Open Secrets, but again, the money is really all in the soft money. Okay, so maybe we'll play that clip now. Maybe this is a good time for me to catch my breath.
All right, let's hear.
This is 3:30.
So can you take us through what we're about to hear?
What we're about to hear is Cynthia McKinney, a Black woman, very brave former Congresswoman, who is describing her experience with the Israel lobby pledge that you need to sign with related to AIPAC. I think because this relates to this is the work of somebody else who interspersed this with some Trump clips. You can just either ignore those or just fast forward over them. But she does a very good interview. And remember, this is not Frame Game Radio speaking. This is a congresswoman. This is one of your representatives describing why she's not able to represent American interests.
All right.
So I think if you just skip to like 3:30. I think it's at 3:30, not 1:30. But
yeah, I put at 3:30.
Okay. Oh, sure. Okay, great.
He may be the worst thing to ever happen to Israel, believe me. Believe me.
Well, let's talk about Cynthia. There are many reports that talks about the influence of the Israeli lobby, the AIPAC, on United States politics in general. Did you experience anything in that realm as far as what one would call the interference in American policy by AIPAC?
Yes, I first-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted, to such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia have to do with Israel? What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents. And I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city.
We will move the American.
So she described that she had to sign a pledge, that all of the congressmen and congresswomen were given a pledge to sign. And she was new, so she was not in for signing it.
Right. Yeah. And the clip goes on. It's interspersed with these sort of Trump clips to show that Trump is sort of beholden to Sheldon Adelson and the rest of the sort of AIPAC gang. But there's another clip in there which shows Earl Hillard, but maybe we can get to that another time. I'll make concise clips that can be easily played instead of stumbling through it. But this is James Traficant, Earl Hillard, Cynthia McKinney, many others. This is a well-known fact. You're going to see more standing ovations for Netanyahu than you will for any president, whether that's Obama or Trump. And it's important to understand that this is not a partisan issue. The goal is to own everyone, or at least substantially control everyone, not just left or right. So another aspect of this that's very dirty, JF, is the revolving door. So what AIPAC also provides is jobs for congressmen and staffers in the vast Jewish advocacy network after they get out of office. So AIPAC is seen as a potential employer for when your political career ends if you served Israel or the Jewish people well during your time in office. So there is not only a culture of fear, not only a culture of bribery and coercion, but there's also this don't bite the hand that feeds you, because there are many examples of high-ranking, especially Republican now, congressmen who go on to have either direct lobbying or high-paying consulting gigs, essentially, for the Israel lobby when their term ends. So it's basically an insurance policy on your own personal career as well. And AIPAC makes sure to reward those people who do, which is another thing that's very different from other lobbies. I mean, I'm not sure that the gun lobby has that much sway. But anyway, it's important to note that AIPAC doesn't win all of its battles, that it doesn't own Congress. I want to make that very clear. It's just that it has a unparalleledly high batting average. And it leads to the kinds of, for votes on bills that you just would not imagine any politician who puts America first putting forward. So a great example of this is Bill 720. So this is Bill 720 is a anti-free speech bill that is basically done in the name of protecting Israel. I'm going to send you the link to it here so that you can see it. And what it does is it makes it illegal to boycott Israel, not just like what we talked about with cutting off funds, but like actually doing away with the First Amendment. And it's it's now been amended several times because it was just so galling on its face. But there is something that AIPAC whistleblowers have called the napkin test, which is sort of a famous example in the 1980s of a high-ranking AIPAC official saying, "See this napkin? I can get 70 signatures on this napkin for whatever I want." And it's that kind of, I've talked about this before, the monologuing tendency for a lot of these people, to on the one hand, they can't let anybody know, but on the other hand, they're so proud of themselves for having attained so much power that that they do want the world to know. So anyway, maybe I'll stop.
Are you describing that this law would not only cut funding, but it would make it illegal to advocate for boycotting Israel?
Yes, you will not have a First Amendment if this does it. This is part of a broader campaign that really started in the 1990s to criminalize hate speech in America. In the 1990s, the ADL began to pressure, began to basically pressure for internet censorship. So there are a number of white identity movements in America historically. I'm not expressing an opinion on them. This is, again, just an anthropological overview. But it's instructive to note that at every time a white identity movement in America has tried to organize, it has been destroyed not by black groups by and large, not by WASPs or Catholics. However distasteful they may have found elements of such groups, but really the muscle behind it all was always this Jewish network. It was always the World Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Congress, the ADL, AIPAC, sometimes other Israel groups like United Israel Peel, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, many others that we've gone over, and this includes the contemporary alt-right, the National Alliance of William Luther Pierce in the 1990s and 2000s, the resistance to the 1960s civil rights acts that included groups like the Legion of Decency and others that tried to basically preserve the white Anglo-Saxon or white Germanic values of America from the 1920s until the 1960s, when they were ultimately destroyed. These groups are really sneaking in making speech illegal in the United States and destroying the First Amendment under the guise of getting rid of anti-Semitism. And this is the sword and the shield strategy, right? They say it's a shield, but they use it like a sword, and you can't have it both ways.
Absolutely. And to specify, because we're talking about huge organizations, but there's also on the ground a much more human phenomena that personally I've observed before being conscious of any of these organizations. I found myself in a scientific debate on YouTube concerning race, and somehow I got identified as a leader of the alt-right just because I was speaking the truth about this subject. And we found campaigns of harassment targeted at me and campaigns of defamation. And every time I was looking into it, Kraut, Sandre, they were all Jewish. And this is the first evocation in my life of asking myself anything about the role of Jewish people in politics in our world. And I was not aware of these questions until I found out, and then the Daily Beast article publishes an article against me, states that I'm a rapist of some kind, and the writer of this article was Jewish. So I will point out that beyond the big organizations that we're looking at, there are probably pockets of very motivated extremist individuals who are just targeting any sort of white nationalist content or anyone who dares make it.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm a Jewish guy, and who am I afraid of coming after me for talking about this? I'm afraid it's Jewish groups. And by the way, like I say, I'm not a white nationalist. I'm just not. Like, I have no problem with, I believe that if you live in a world that has Black Lives Matter and Black identity movements and Jewish identity movements and Hispanic identity movements, that white nationalism is as decent a position, at least a moderate version of it, not the extreme fringe, but it's as acceptable a political philosophy as any other identity advocacy group. But I have a lot of differences. Like, I've talked about the fact that ultimately I would like sort of, racial transfuturism, where we get past identity politics altogether. And that the reason I support white identity politics, so to speak, is because I think that without that sort of mobilized political force, you're simply never going to get other identity groups to put down their power in this corruption. I think there needs to be balance to the force, so to speak. But, there are a lot of people who on the alt-right who could come after me for espousing the views that I do about it. But the fact is, I'm not afraid of them. It's the folks at BuzzFeed and the ADL and New York Times and all these other media outlets. And if it gets to that point, the AJC and WJC and these other Persian army that stand behind them that could kick into gear. That if I'm effective in persuading people, or if we're effective in persuading, that's the culture of fear against free speech, in my view. I have not said anything here, and I don't say anything against Jewish people, but merely criticizing institutions and leadership is enough to make me fear the response from my own leadership, and that has to end.
Absolutely, and sometimes their campaigns of defamation may not completely knock down an individual, but I think that a lot of this system wants just to maintain the image that we will attack you if you talk about these things. We will try to strike your YouTube channel. We will try to do defamatory hit pieces on you.
Yeah. So, I could take it, the next level deeper into this, but maybe are there any questions by the chat or any questions by you about things that we've covered so far?
Personally, I'm fine with everything we've covered. I will still read the super chats that we've had. Tesla says, oh, this one I read. Zyklon says, why is their preferred method to attack livelihood every single time? Catch Bay says, ban long and meaningless monology. Secret Genius says, this is standard white nationalist lore. Anyone black-pilled by it needs to sleep it off, never give up. Brandon Fly asks a question to you, Frame Game. He says, why right-wing Jews haven't been able to stop the self-destructive actions of organized Jewry?
That's a good question. So, for one, most right-wing Jews are of the Jacob Wohl, variety. I'm not trying to talk negatively about any particular person, but they're of that Zionist right-wing philosophy. They are, you got essentially three types of right-wing Jews. You have the folks like me who are enormous minority, but not alone. I know a number of Jews who hold my beliefs, and we talk fairly frequently. They just don't want to put their names out there or their voice out there. And another one is the neocon right-wing Jew, right? This is the Sheldon Adelson type. These are the folks who are, they don't, well, Sheldon Adelson is actually very complicated because he supports Trump now. But you have the anti-nationalist neocon right-wing Jewish faction, which is really the backbone of the modern GOP. That is, these are the groups of Jews who brought the modern GOP to power through fundraising and political advocacy. And then you have the MAGA, the Jewish MAGAPEDs, of whom I am a subsect, but who, generally speaking, think that white identity politics is racist. And while they don't like black identity politics, they are tolerant of it. And they have zero problem whatsoever with Jewish identity politics, and in fact, they find it to be a functional necessity to life on Earth, and could never, in their wildest, imagination, imagine making AIPAC register as a foreign agent or cutting foreign aid to Israel. So the two groups on either side of me on the right wing are much more numerous. They are much more organized. And they have much more collective money and much more collective influence. The fact is, one of the things that JF is doing with his work and what others like me are doing with ours is something that is relatively novel. That is, in the internet sphere, doing it at this professional level. The fact is, I don't think most Jewish people know what I know. I mean, the only reason I had to sort of look in the mirror about this is because I've had a very sort of weird set of life history experiences and a weird combination of personality traits that made me particularly curious and persistent. There's a lot of other things you can focus on in life, and most Jews simply don't even know this information. I suspect if they did,
there is a lasting oppressive effect of mainstream media and its structure that I think also oppresses Jews. I think that there are many Jewish personalities, celebrities, I mean, who may agree with everything we're saying today, but they wouldn't show up on a show like mine, and they wouldn't stand against the actions of their group just because it's too troublesome. Why would they care about saying something? They can just keep living their life without talking about it, and they won't be annoyed by their tribe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly like, I mean, everybody wants to fit in. Why start a fire if it doesn't have any payoff? And that's part of the reason that priority number one of these pressure boys, as Truman called them, is to commercially bankrupt you, to make sure that there's no money in your movement, so that people cannot be professional and dedicate significant amount of time and energy to the space, even if they wanted to. So, on that note, I was going to talk, if we're going to get
I
back
will
into a
read a
deep
few
dive on these
super
things.
chats before we
sure.
get back. Yekim Arg says, lol, at the state of IBS, these assholes don't even understand why upset young individuals looked for their content to begin with. The IDs are what is important and not the attractive talking heads. Keep talking about IDs, Jeff. What do you mean? You mean I'm not an attractive talking head? Vinny S. says, Jeff, would you consider having someone like Mr. Mitaker or Black Pigeon Speaks to talk on the value of anonymity on the current public discourse online? Thank you all for the great shows. I'm totally interested in this subject. We could do a show about it. Personally, I've abandoned anonymity because I said whatever I want to produce, I want my name to be attached to it, and I want to, when I produce videos, I want it to matter to me that it's true what we're saying. I want to feel this duty to be always correct and to not pass false information. And I think that although I understand the purpose of anonymity and I respect it, and definitely some creators should be anonymous, on my side I've made the other choice, which is I want everyone to know what I'm doing, and I want myself, when I enter into a live episode, to know my name will be attached forever to what's about to happen. All right, Frame Games. Where are we at now? We've covered huge agencies, we've covered APAC, we've covered part of the money structure that leads to these things existing.
Yes. So now I wanted to travel a little bit back farther in time to go deeper into understanding, that this is nothing new. APAC is nothing new. The ADL and the Jewish Agency are nothing new. I wanted to show some examples of how these organizations operate, and sort of take us back in time now to talk about the Jewish Agency, which is the first agency that I presented here. Again, that's the world's first responder to emergency situations relating to Jewish welfare. I
think before we start on the history, I think it's better that I take a break because I need a 1-minute break. And so let's do it now. And let's start on the history when I'm back.
All right, great.
We'll be back, people. All right, I am back. Are you here, Frame Game?
I sure am. Can you hear me?
Yep, let's get through it.
All right. So, a lot of questions that people in the audience may be having is, how did this structure grow to this point? Why did nobody try to stop it? And if both the legislative and executive branch are so disproportionately controlled or influenced by the Israel or sort of conglomerated Jewish lobby, when did this start? Because obviously it wasn't the case during George Washington or Jefferson or, when did it really start? And I'm going to, present, I guess, and you can talk about things like the Balfour Declaration in 1917 and the impact on, World War I and things like that. But in the American story, I want to take us back to the founding of Israel and really understanding how it is that American presidents came to defer to the Zionist lobby. And what's very instructive is a lot of people, the mainstream telling of President Truman in the 1940s is that he was sort of the great emancipator of the Jewish people around the world by putting America's imprimatur on Israel's legitimacy. And again, I'm not questioning Israel's legitimacy here, but to know the story of Truman is to know the story of all the precedents that future presidents had to follow or else buck the trajectory. And basically nobody except the Kennedys ever tried to buck this precedent that was set. But it's useful to understand that Truman did not want to do what he did with respect to the Israel lobby, American Zionists, and the initial found relationship between Israel and America. So, there's an article that I sent you that does a good accounting of this, but there's lots of other sources. I'll send it to you again just so that you have it. This was this one. Sorry, it's from the New Republic, and it's called "Was Harry Truman a Zionist?" So here you go. I just posted it again so that you can see it. I'm going to read some passages for people so that you understand that we got into this special relationship between America and Israel on extremely deceitful and corrupt grounds that all had to do with political pressure, not morality, and that Truman himself was extremely against the actions that he was strong-armed into taking every step of the way. So, I'll pull up selected quotes of it but you're free to leave it on the screen. So, essentially, Truman, as this article and many others have documented, Truman didn't know all the details of the history of Palestine when he came into office. But he knew that Jews had come to Palestine a half century before, that is during the sort of 1890s, during the rise of the Zionist movement, to establish a Jewish state where another people had lived and made up the overwhelming majority for the prior 1400 years. He was offended by the proposal pressed by American Zionists that a minority should be allowed to rule a majority. On moral grounds, Truman did not want a Jewish minority ruling the Palestinian majority. As president, as president, he initially opposed the creation of a Jewish state and tried to promote an Arab-Jewish federation or binational state. He eventually gave up in 1947 after pressure from the American Zionist Council and the American Jewish Congress, but he continued to express regret in private for the unwarranted interference of American Zionists. He said that after he recognized the new state, he pressed the Israeli government to negotiate with Arabs over borders and refugees and expressed disgust at the manner in which Jews were handling the refugee problem. He thought that God had not picked any favorites. This is what he wrote in his own diary in 1945. He said he was skeptical of the idea of Jews as a chosen people, saying, "I never thought God picked favorites." He basically, he was first lobbied to back a Jewish state in September 1945 by Rabbis Silver and Stephen Wise, who were the leaders of the American Zionist Emergency Council, which was another coalition umbrella of Zionist groups, of which there were dozens at the time. And they urged him to support turning over all of Palestine, which at the time was 30% Jewish, to the Jews, much like a sort of apartheid state in South Africa, where 30% of whites had an apartheid government over the native black population. Truman told them that he objected to a religious state, whether Catholic or Jewish. This is in 1945, before he eventually capitulated. He also expressed fear that trying to establish one would lead to war. It's also instructive to note how many wars there have been since 1945 in the Middle East versus in the 1,500 years before that. So in November of 1945, Truman repeated his opposition to a Jewish state to a meeting of American diplomats in the Middle East. Proponents of a Jewish Commonwealth, he said, quote, didn't give consideration to the international political situation in that area, quote. He then said that the government of Palestine, this is a quote, should be a government of the people of Palestine, irrespective of race, creed, or color, end quote. He then went on to support something that was called the Morrison-Grady Plan. And he regularly conferred with Grady, who was one of the guys who wrote it. And the Morrison-Grady Plan established a federated Palestine with autonomous Jewish and Arab regions, rather than the whole thing being it. I'm only mentioning this history, by the way, JF, because you'll see the role of the Jewish agency here and of money, Jewish money in American politics owning the executive branch even then. Again, this is 1945 to 1947. So the thing about the Morrison-Grady Plan, again, 2 states, a Jewish and an Arab region, and that Arabs and Jews would enjoy equal representation in the national legislature rather than it being a Jewish state ruling it. And Truman and the State Department were eager to publicly endorse the plan, but Silver and the Zionist lobby mounted a furious campaign against the proposal. By the way, you'll note that this article, among many others I could cite, is written by a Jewish author, and it's meant to attack Truman. I mean, like this is not a hit piece on the Jewish lobby in the 1940s. They just, they're monologuing here when they don't realize how much they're actually, showing their own, untoward levels of political influence. So here's what happened. The Zionist lobby bragged that it could call on thousands of activists across the country, and was joined by Democrat Party officials and White House aides who were worried that without the Jewish vote in New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio, the Democrats could lose Congress in November. At that time, it's important to remember, New York was a super important political prize, and Jews had proven decisive in New York elections. They turned out, and they were, a lot of them lived in New York, especially at that time. At a cabinet meeting on July 30th that year, Truman held up a stack of telegrams protesting the Morrison-Grady bill and saying that the Zionist protest telegrams were 4 inches thick. And then he exclaimed to his cabinet, Jesus Christ couldn't please these people when he was here on earth. So what luck do we have here?
Interesting.
But with the 1948 presidential election looming, the Zionists threatened to primary President Truman so that he'd have a political opponent within his own party if he ran for election again. And so he was convinced to agree to political pressure by the Jewish agency. Remember, that is the sort of big mama. Its board of governors is the brain trust of pretty much all of this. So he decided that he would try to step out and leave resistance to the Zionists to the State Department, because his political appointees in the State Department generally opposed the Zionists, and it wouldn't smear Truman himself getting involved.
He trusted his subordinates to handle the resistance to Zionism.
Right. Well, because he was getting smeared in the papers, and they were, the belief was that if the Zionists turned up the pressure, they would lose the election in 1948. So Truman had that Faustian choice to make. Do I stay in power and capitulate on doing something that morally I'm opposed to, or do I do the right thing and risk me personally suffering? So we know what choice he made, and that's kind of this story. But it's really the story of the Jewish Agency that everyone reports to. So basically,
so when
he
you say
agreed
what choice
under
he
political.
made, he became a pro-Israel proponent, a Zionist.
Yep, he relinquished his support for Morris and Grady. His support is of the what would go on to be the winning plan to make Israel a completely Jewish state. It was his signature on that. America's signature on it is what legitimized it. Up until then, there had been a tremendous amount of international debate and fury on all sides about how to handle the situation. I mean, remember, a lot of countries wanted to put Israel in Madagascar, not in such a politically heated area. But anyway, so the State Department then took positions that were unfriendly to the American Zionist Council, and the Zionist lobby continued to step up pressure, threatening electoral defeat. They also had to worry not just about being primaried within the Democratic Party, but also about the Republican opponent who was, I'm sorry, not just about their Republican opponent primary candidate, but also the Progressive Party candidate, Henry Wallace, who at the time was gaining a tremendous amount of steam among white Americans for charging that Truman was a vote to rebuild Nazi Germany, and that basically Truman could put that pressure out by co-signing with the Zionists. So he could basically take out two birds with one stone. So anyway, so it's not just the Jewish vote, but it was also fundraising from wealthy Jewish contributors, mostly in New York at the time. So the Jewish Agency went to Paris then and issued a new proposal for partitioning Palestine. And Truman refused it, and he said that the Jewish Agency's Paris Declaration was unacceptable, but essentially after visits from Democratic officials that were worried about Jewish support and lobbying threats from a major Jewish contributor, combined with electoral threats, Truman ultimately gave in and issued a statement of support. Basically, then Truman then went on to write in a letter, "I don't think I've ever had as much pressure put on the White House." Remember, this is a guy who ended World War II, who's saying Jewish political money was the most pressure he ever faced as president. I mean, that's an astounding thing. I mean, that is the most important war in human history. And the sitting American president who dropped two atomic bombs on Japan, who is saying, the most pressure I ever faced was the international Jewish community strong-arming me politically. And then he went on to say in November 1947 that the plan went through because of the, quote, pressure boys, end quote, which he was referring to the Zionist Jewish organizations. Yet throughout this period, Truman continued to admit privately that he much preferred the Morrison-Grady plan for a federated Palestine, and blamed the Zionists for its abandonment. What's most remarkable is that he continued to insist, after Israel was already established, after he already established its legitimacy, that the two-state solution with Arab autonomy was the right choice. And even after recognizing the state of Israel, he blamed the quote, the fanaticism of New York Jews, end quote. So really look, this is...
The two-state solution was denied to Palestinians in New York, basically.
Yes. Yeah. So, but this is because, the Zionist movement started small, right? It started as a 1 shekel per month international organization where Jews all over the world, would contribute $1 a month. And then they came together and they created the Zionist organizations, which then blossomed into the Jewish Agency, which then developed the World Jewish Congress, which then developed the American Jewish Congress, which then had all of the organizations we now know and love report up to it: the ADL, AIPAC, J Street, all these other ones. I didn't mention J Street yet. J Street is essentially the left-wing AIPAC. I can turn to that next if you want, but let me know if there's any questions about this. I think that history is instructive.
All right. Well, we can go through. I'm pretty shocked. So, since 1945, this lobby has an extreme control over American politics. And now, all of the actions of Trump make sense to me when Trump is in line with Israel's strikes on Syria. This is the same lobby exerting the same influence that they did 80 years ago and that they did throughout the last few decades. It explains a lot, and I have no question, but I have realizations of the extent of power that we're faced with, an intergenerational power that has found a way to survive through huge amounts of flow of money, and that keeps pressuring politicians, using them as pawns. So Vinny S., I read your super chat. Zyklon says, I will not read this one. Ospin says, Frame Game, what's your opinion on the evolutionary theory that Jews are genetically subversive? There will be a few exceptions along the curve, but the crop will naturally be more subversive also. I think that the theory he mentions comes from Kevin McDonald, and I will speak with Dr. Kevin McDonald on Saturday. Don't miss this episode. But essentially, it's the theory that Jews, having traveled a lot inter-country, they may have evolved and they may have found a way to survive better by displaying a lot of things that they don't live by displaying non-ethnocentricity, but by actually living their life very ethnocentrically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly think that it is partially true, at least. But I would caution, a fully rounded analysis of that conclusion before you hop on board it, right? So there are a few things to keep in mind here. Jews are not a monolith, and there is a big difference between Zionist Jews and Bolshevik Jews, right? I mean, this is the classic, Winston Churchill article from 1920, Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. And that's Winston Churchill writing at the peak of the British Empire in 1920, saying that there are, in his view, as he put it in this article, and I will send this to you, JF, so that you have it. You might want to pull it up on screen. I think it's very instructive people understand the elements of it because it still echoes to this day. It's the difference between Sheldon Adelson and George Soros. They're very, very different. I would submit that right-wing Jews are motivated by and large, by collectivism and a sort of Israel Jewish kinship, and that many left-wing Jews are motivated by. And by the way, scroll down there and look at the section headings. Try to imagine JF saying that today. A whole section calling left-wing Jews terrorist Jews, saying they're responsible for every subversive movement since the French Revolution. I mean, a lot of strong language by Winston Churchill there. But what I would say is that...
So those are all quotes of Churchill?
This is an article
written by him.
Yeah, I mean, the article's at the top of the page, but I can send you, a clear print version of it. But he blames Bolshevik Jews for all of the major subversive revolutions in Russia, in France, as he describes it, across the world for centuries. Now that's Winston Churchill. Before 25 years before World War II, and 2 years after World War I ended. Now I'm not making an opinion on that, but what I'm saying is that there is a big divide between Zionists and Bolsheviks, and they are motivated, in my opinion, by completely different motivations, and not all of them are ethnocentric. Like, for example, George Soros. I pulled up a list of major donors here for JF on the right wing and on the left wing. Right on the right wing, top five you could say are Sheldon Adelson, Paul Singer, Bob Kraft, Steve Wynn, Milbank Tweed, and others historically. On the left wing, you got George Soros, Haim Sabin, Donald Sussman, J.B. Pritzker, Daniel Abraham, a lot of others, right? But they are, by and large, the split tends to be that the Zionist right-wing Jews tend to have strong ethnic affinity for other Jews and for the state of Israel because it is the land of the Jewish people. Whereas left-wing Jews tend to engage in behaviors that you may think of as appearing ethnocentric, and which certainly may have ethnocentric strands to them, but by and large are motivated by individualist personal enrichment that happens because of the unique Jewish position within the international diversity industry. So I don't think George Soros is hugely ethnocentric for the benefit of Jewish people. I just don't think he is. His own writings on these are fairly extensive. I think that a lot of it is fairly genuine. He wants open borders for Israel. That's why Israel attacks him. That's why Israel helped Hungary kick him out. That's why right-wing Jews hate Winston Churchill. I'm sorry, George Soros. But George Soros, through his Open Society Foundation, is one of the biggest players in the world in international politics because of the diversity industry, because he individually and his family locally and his, the people in his network, they get rich and powerful off of their position as the tip of the spear of ethnic and religious identity politics. So I don't think they're doing it because of a group evolutionary strategy so much as an individual, opportunity to get rich. It's a lot easier to get rich leading a Jewish identity movement than it is to get rich, equivalently rich being the number one dentist in your town. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot easier to hijack somebody else's identity movement than it is to make it on merit in the world in the era of identity politics. So, if you want to say that Jews are responsible, that everything Jews do is group evolutionary strategy, I'm not sure why you don't say the exact same thing about white Gentiles. You would sort of have to make the argument. There's two arguments around this. One is, they simply have different natural levels of ethnocentric predilection. And I actually agree with that. I do think that is, although it's hard, you need a placebo test in a world where white Gentiles aren't constantly told to hate themselves. Like, would they emerge as being deeply ethnocentric if you didn't have this, soft genocide worldwide about it? I doubt it. I think that they would be more collectivist in nature, although I don't think it would necessarily rise to the average Jewish level, but it might approximate it. But just to close out my answer on that, I think a lot of white nationalists are sort of eager to imply that blacks are motivated by group interest, naturally, racially, they're born that way. So are Jews, so are Hispanics, so are Asians, but white European Gentiles alone are not. I think that is, you can't make that argument consistently. You can make that argument as a matter of degree, but as a yes or no, I don't think it holds up. And I do think that there is a tendency to, look back in history and say, oh, that guy was 1/8 Jewish. It was the Jewish, eighth of him that convinced him to do this, while the Gentile 7/8 of him didn't. Something I've struggled with lately is the failure of white Gentiles to protect Jews like me when we get under attack by Jewish, organized power. Like, where were you guys when Benjamin Friedman was attacked? Where were you guys when Norman Finkelstein was attacked, or David Cole, or me, or anybody else who in the Jewish Republican coalition who questioned the war in Iraq in 2001? I understand all of the pressure and all of the extortion and crimes against white people who struggle to put forth a white identity movement, but historically, you guys aren't doing a great job of protecting whistleblowers. So, there's a lot of questions there that need to be asked if you're going to use that to play the blame game. I'm not saying absolve guilt,
take, and we will explore it more in depth with Kevin MacDonald, who wrote The Culture of Critique, the book, next Saturday. However, I will say for now, I think you misunderstand the statement and the theory there. I think that the theory perfectly addresses your concern. It doesn't say whites cannot be ethnocentric. It says, why are Jews so able to deploy ethnocentricity in a complex world where they are traveling across country and they are caring for their own interest, whereas whites don't seem to be able to apply this ethnocentricity as far as their voting pattern goes on immigration laws, for example, and on their openness to the other. And Kevin McDonald seems to be explaining this, although I have to read more in depth before I interview him. But he seems to be explaining this precisely through the fact that the Jews have undergone environments where they were minorities and they were able to survive this environment, whereas the whites, they were always in their country. There are less events of deportation and less events of traveling for the white population. Therefore, they didn't have to adjust and to evolve this supplementary skill of a sort of ethnocentricity that can be deployed in an environment where they are not the majority.
I mean, look, and I acknowledge it, JF, though. I like I said, right away, I do think that is at least partially true. I think another part of it, though, I mean, there's just so many angles to this. Like, consider the fact that it could be the case that ethnic Ashkenazi Jews are also genetically much more similar to each other than ethnic Swedes are to ethnic Italians. Like, I mean, there may be a lot less infighting, among. Look, I don't want to. I want to be honest about this while also, acknowledging that I do agree with much of K-Mac's work, and I am an evolution. I mean, I love evolutionary psychology, and I do think that it's the only foundational way to explain things. What I'm trying to do is, especially because a lot of what we talked about tonight and what we'll talk about next week or whenever the next series is, it can be used to sort of, mobilize public opinion in a way that I want to try to temper with sort of talking about the good side too. I do want to caution people to sort of use that framework, that KMAC framework, but also to sort of, recognize some of its limitations and try to be mindful of that when you can. If you do subscribe to my theory that Jewish influence in America really didn't develop significant malevolent aspects to it until the 1920s. You'd sort of need to explain, the organized Jewish influence from the 1500s until the 1900s in a way that makes it look equivalently ethnocentric. I think that while there may be latent ethnocentric biases in Jews that are higher than in Gentiles, the steroids of it, if you will, the unnatural explosion is really made possible by organization, by organized entities that are mobilized for power.
Interesting perspective. I'll explore that more in depth Saturday, but it's good to hear your perspective. So do we conclude? Is there points that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, well, I did want to cover sort of a brief history of Jewish organizations being above the law. I think that that's something that is, and knowing sort of specific organizations associated with them. So one of the things that drives this subject to me uniquely as a Jewish person is that, you just see all of these examples of individuals and organizations being explicitly above the law. And then you think, well, if you have a humanistic sense of justice, you have to call this out as a Jew. And I'll give you some examples through history and then into the modern era. Okay, so I've covered briefly, the presidential pardons of tried and convicted criminals. But now maybe we can talk about AIPAC for a minute. And I may have discussed this on a previous stream, but there's a very instructive episode that happened in 2005, which was here, and I'll send you the article here just so that you have it and can put it on the screen, JF. And This is a link from The Guardian, a left-wing newspaper, and Jewish friendly. And this is their description of a case that spanned from 2005 to 2008. And the purpose of me saying this is really to answer the question of how do they keep getting away with it, right? How is it that nobody has held these groups to account so far? And this is a good case study of how this happened. So Steve Rosen and Keith Wiseman were accused of providing U.S. defense secrets to an Israel embassy in Washington. That is, stealing American secrets and passing them on to Israel. And what happened is these two guys were caught dead to rights. They were high-ranking AIPAC officials, and what they did is they conferred with a former Pentagon analyst, Lawrence Franklin, who pled guilty. This again, remember, the American Pentagon guy pled guilty to disclosing this classified information to Rosen and Weissman. Okay, you have a guilty plea in hand. Okay, then a Congressional Quarterly obtained a transcript of a tape that was recorded by the NSA. And on this tape, Jane Harmon, who was Jane Harmon was a member of the Bush administration, was secretly recorded taping on a secretly recorded tape, telling an Israeli agent that she would pressure the U.S. Justice Department to reduce or drop spying charges against the AIPAC officials. And in return, on this recorded phone call, the Israeli agent offered to get a wealthy Jewish donor to help get funds, for election campaigns, and to pressure Nancy Pelosi, the then minority leader in the House of Representatives, to pressure Pelosi to appoint Jane Harmon to a senior position on the Congressional Intelligence Committee. Okay, and at the end of this tape, she ended it with the following words: "This conversation doesn't exist." All right, so you have a high-ranking U.S. government official pleading guilty to two AIPAC officials feeding information privately to Israel. You have a third-party high-ranking U.S. official who has a secret conversation with Israeli agents where she offers to trade pressuring, getting the Justice Department to drop the charges in return for being appointed to a senior level on a congressional committee and getting wealthy donors to give her money. You had her ending the tape with saying, "This conversation doesn't exist. Don't tell anybody else about this or else we're fucked." It all comes out. You have the tape getting out. You have a guilty plea in hand. And then what happens?
You get to jail.
At that moment, in a world where Americans had autonomy of their own government, that would be the case. But here's what happened. After the intervention of George Bush, remember, neocon, Jewish, heavily financed by Jewish organizations, neocon president George Bush, who took us to Iraq, who started the situation we're in the Middle East. His attorney general, Alberto Gonzales, personally conferred with the FBI to get the FBI to drop its probe of Harmon and then drop all charges against Rosen and Weissman on the grounds that the case would be unwinnable because the trial itself would disclose classified information. So here you have AIPAC, that is the organization funding all of these politicians, getting caught dead to rights in a spy ring. This was only 10 years ago, by the way. This isn't like 1945. And then having the Attorney General of the United States personally step in to call off the FBI, personally clear everyone involved, because if their crimes came out in public, it would be classified information, so you couldn't present it. I mean, it's this level of corruption. I mean, and by the way, this is not the first time. I could rattle off 10 similar cases to this, but you're above the law. You can't prosecute these people. They are your government. I mean, the whole thing is it really changes your outlook on how the world works. Because even if you catch them dead to rights.
Because everything on the record is sufficient for the criminal conviction. There's not even a question of mens rea or intent when she says this conversation doesn't exist. It's a proof of intent to hide. And so you have all the elements of a crime. And it gets dropped. And this excuse of it would be too hard to win, that's the typical excuse for discretionary application of the law. And this is a big problem in the US, even beyond the Jewish lobby. The discretionary power that district attorneys, prosecutors, and the FBI has is too big.
Well, I mean, as you heard tonight, they're in love. They're in love. I mean, it's like expecting a husband to try his wife for a crime if she commits one. I mean, it's what do you do about love? I mean, they are on the record in public. I mean, not even trying to hide it. So there's so many examples of this, some of which you've covered, on your streams before. You have the King David Hotel bombing. You have, you have the Lavon affair, the USS Liberty. I mean, really dozens of others. You have the stealing of uranium, all the espionage rings. You have, the ADL literally stealing police records from local police departments. Every single time charges get dropped, or at worst, it's a hand slap. Yeah, I mean, Mark Rich is a great example. I mean, JF, do you know Mark Rich?
No.
Okay, well, Mark Rich was a deeply corrupt hedge fund manager who was a huge financier of the DNC and a huge power player in international Jewish politics. And he was, partially responsible for the Bill Clinton rise to power. He was a huge contributor to the Clintons, and the Clintons were very much, financed by the groups we're talking about. So on Bill Clinton's last day, and so Mark Rich was tried and convicted for a ungodly number of white collar crimes related to, basically everything in the book you can do wrong financially, Mark Rich did. I mean, it was disgusting. And what happened was these Jewish groups put enormous amount of pressure on Bill Clinton and his campaign. And this includes the Conference of Presidents, which had personal meetings with him. That was the group I mentioned. That's sort of the equivalent organization to AIPAC, but for presidents, to get President Clinton to pardon Mark Rich, to get him out of jail. And it's a really disgusting episode here because, just like President Truman, who came before him, Bill Clinton did not want to pardon Mark Rich, even though at least he's on record saying, before he actually did the pardon, expressing a fair amount of disgust for it. But eventually the pressure mounted. You had letters from the World Jewish Congress. You had letters from the AJC. JF, there was a personal letter from the Holocaust Museum in D.C. It was written on Holocaust Museum letterhead to pardon Mark Rich, a white collar criminal. Let me pull this up for you. Just give me a minute while I pull up the link here. But while I pull up that link, here you go. So this is the letter from Rabbi Greenberg, chair of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council, which wrote a personal letter to the. I'll get the exact text of it, just because I think it'll be useful to throw on the screen. But all of these organizations converge for a coordinated pressure campaign. I mean, what is the Holocaust Museum doing lobbying for the pardon of a notorious white collar criminal? I mean, the answer is because Mark Rich, if he were to be free, would be allowed to bundle hundreds of millions of more dollars into the Jewish lobbying ecosystem. And sorry, I'm going to pull up this thing while I'm trying to walk and type at the same time. But what happens? President Clinton this was a really dirty bomb. And the press was sort of, all over it to the extent that they could be. But on the last morning of his presidency, the very last act that President Clinton takes as sitting president of the United States, the very last thing he does is a pardon for Mark Rich.
Wow. So
that was the last act of President Clinton.
This is symbolically very telling. I mean, if I was a president for 8 years and I knew it's my last day, it seems I would want to do something absolutely amazing for my people. And Bill Clinton just conceded to the Jewish lobby. That's his last move. It's so sad.
Yep. Well, his wife wanted to become president, and there's a lot of reasons for it, right? I mean, the Clinton Global Initiative. There's a lot of relations between the international Jewish community and top-level Democrat, progressive politics. So there were a lot of reasons for him to do it. But if you wonder, well, how do how do we hold these institutions accountable? The reason I feel compelled to do this series, JF, is because the FBI is not holding them accountable. Presidents are not holding them accountable. Legislatures, law enforcement is not holding them accountable. So who does it fall to? It falls to we the people.
All right, and we have a question by someone. The Bad Virus sends £50. Thank you so much for the donations. He says, we bleed, we suffer. Empathy is the weapon of the bold. Deception is the weapon of the weak. Penguin says, thank you both for your time and effort. And Richard has a question. He says, I really appreciate Frame Games teaching lessons, but oh boy, could we use solution suggestions? Or am I right to think that all of his info is very important for the explicit use of taking down the Zog? So Frame Games, you've touched on it in your last sentence. What are the solutions to the problem that you present, which is absolutely enormous? It doesn't seem like a single solution can be applied here.
Well, the first solution is awareness in order to drive political will so that there is an alternative to playing into this lobby's power. That is not, it's important to note that not everyone is beholden to AIPAC. Only about 2/3 of Congress goes to the AIPAC meeting, every year, which is a lot, but it's not 100%. And the biggest threat to the Jewish lobby is actually other racial identity group lobbies. Like it's groups like Black identity politicians and Hispanic identity politicians and others who have become mobilized over the past 60 years and who Jews are dependent on they're dependent on their leadership place within those groups in order to actually have the kind of coalition power they do. So, a good example of this was the ADL wanting to be in charge of, racial bias education at Starbucks, and get all the money for training 175,000 employees. And then the Black groups basically pressured Starbucks to drop the ADL. And that's very instructive because the only way to beat them, in my view, is to join them. And that's why I do support identity politics for everyone or for no one. And since these groups ain't putting down their torch anytime soon, I support the rise of identity within European Americans and indigenous Europeans so that when there are political candidates who run for office and they want to just lower taxes or, I don't know, get a bridge built in their city, they can turn to a Gentile majority lobbying group rather than relying completely for their money on the Jewish network. So, the first step is organize, awareness, talk to people, spread this video, do it with love. But until there is, step one is populist support. Step two is translating it into political action. And somewhere between step 1 and 2 is organize, form groups, meet regularly, and make it a personal mission to red pill one person this month.
Absolutely. On my side, the solutions, I like what Frame Games presents, but this is not enough. The alt-right has been talking about these things for a long time. It's not sufficient. Information is not sufficient, and I'm saying this as a person whose main purpose in this world, economically at least, my job here on YouTube, is to inform people. But information is not enough. We need to develop a system that will call out that sort of stuff constantly. I agree. We need to spread to the most normies we can. I agree, and I will do that in my life. But we need to organize resistance against what Frame Games has presented today. Shows a complete control of American presidents for more than 70 years. It shows that politicians feel extorted, and we look at the actions that the Jewish lobby is making on politicians, and it is extortion in many cases. And we look at their interventions with the criminal justice system, it is extortion by the very report of The Guardian. We have people pressuring with money, an almost infinite flow of money if you compare it to anything else in society. And information should only be one branch that we explore, and we should also develop a strategy of resistance against the overtaking of American politics and world politics by this Jewish lobby.
Yeah, and it's instructive to know how B'nai B'rith got started, right? It was $1 a month contributions to a common cause. You start with something little, but you grow it every day. ADL started as 2 empty desks in the back of a B'nai B'rith lodge. These things, you need to mobilize, you need to put money into it, you need to make an industry out of it. Let me tell you, I don't consider this a black pill thing to say, but there's that great quote, right? Every great cause begins as a movement, turns into a business, and degenerates into a racket. I believe that, I think that, whatever the good intentions of these organized Jewish networks were to start, they may have been very noble to start. And then turned out there was a lot of money in it. And now it's at a point where it's too strong to let it go. And this is why I say you have to commercialize, these identity aspects. You need to, your super chats are helping, JF, make a living, and him being a professional allows things like this to happen. Find people who are making a difference and support them. And then they will support other people in turn. And then you start to get a business. But here's the thing that I caution constantly. Don't think you're going to be able to have a movement that is, free from any element of some of this stuff itself. But the question is, are you willing to do things that may have unsavory business aspects? Like a lot of people who come to this, they come to it from the right wing. They don't like identity politics. They don't want to fund it. But if you see it as a temporary solution on the way to a world with much more balanced or far less toxic identity politics, which is how I see it. I don't want identity politics in the long run, but I see it as a necessary short-term and medium-term measure in order to achieve that one thing we all want, right? Equality. Ain't going to get there unless you include white people in that. That's my view.
And I think that since this all revolves around the amount of money that we're faced with, this whole system is maintained because of a flow of money coming in. And one other thing you can do is devalue money. You can isolate part of your life from the economic system. You can base it around your family, of course, like most people, but also things like Bitcoin, and be outside of the normal economic system and be a force of resistance against the normal economic system. And you'll see that money drives the world, and when you don't engage with these people, when you don't care about if they defame you, when you have nothing to lose, they have no power over you. So think about your liberty and think about cultivating your liberty and maintaining it, and not letting yourself be intimidated by what has intimidated so many US presidents. Stand for the truth, stand for the resistance, and spread this video as much as you can. Frame Games, I think it completes our expose for today.
I think so. I think this is a good stopping point.
All right. It was great having you on, and we will continue our investigation along the many weeks that will follow, and we will go in depth about the effects of the money system that we've described today in a very broad fashion. And I thank you so much for your work, Frame Games. It was awesome.
Beautiful. Thanks to you too, and everyone. Try to keep love in your heart when you talk about this too. But have a great week, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.